Good evening and welcome to the Issaquah City Council Committee Work Session, Monday, October 29th. Our session this evening is going to cover budget, basically. I do want to take a moment before we begin this evening to take a moment of silence for the victims of the Tree of Life synagogue shooting this weekend in Pittsburgh. So we're going to take a moment and then we'll get started. All right, thank you very much. And we're on, technically speaking, ID 0280, proposed 2019 budget deliberations. With that, I will hand it over to City Administrator Moon.
Thank you. We have quite a bit of information to cover tonight. I'm estimating this will go a little bit longer than our last work session, as I had foreshadowed last time. I wanted to, before we get into tonight's presentation, just call attention to the fact that we've included as part of your packet the salary schedule. So that includes all of our classifications and the ranges for those classifications. That's a requirement that we deliver that to you as part of budget deliberations. And if there are questions that we can answer about that, certainly let us know. So with that, I'll get into tonight's presentation. We're covering the expenditure side of the general fund tonight. You'll recall when we left off on October 22nd, I told you we had approximately $1.7 million of new revenue in the general fund. And we just listed a few of the expenditure increases that we saw as we were developing the budget so that you could see how quickly we began to worry about our ability to cover those expenditures. Some of these, of course, are a little bit more of an option than others, and I'll walk through those as we go through the presentation tonight. These totaled, just the ones on the slide, total over 2.2, I believe, $million. And because we had these cost drivers, we needed to find places in our operating budget that we could reduce. And we had some natural reductions as one-time items fell off, but we also made some difficult choices this year. This also came into play as we had to decide what to transfer from general fund into some of the other operating funds, like our street fund and our fleet fund. And as we highlighted on the first night, you have seen that we utilized a portion of fund balance in both of those funds, and we'll come back to that the next budget work session when we talk in greater depth about other funds other than the general fund. We also stepped back and tried to do a better job this year of analyzing what our year-over-year trends have been and to budget closer to actual. I have high hopes that we'll continue to get really good at that as we utilize our new Questica budget tool. Gives us great financial data and allows us to quickly see those trends.
So, City Administrator, can I ask one question about that? So, I'm sorry, tell me again the relationship between this list and the 1.7 billion.
There isn't. So 1.7 is a new revenue. So that was the box that we were trying to live within. We were trying to match expenditure level to the level of ongoing revenue. So we started by first forecasting revenue and then determining what we could afford in 2019. This is just a list of expenditures that also started to roll in as we built the expenditure side of the budget, and they exceeded that 1.7.
So is it fair to say that the 1.7 goes towards the 1.7 plus found savings?
Correct.
Equals this list?
That's correct.
Okay.
All right, and we showed this at the last budget work session as well. This is a chart that depicts how the preliminary budget fit with the baseline scenario that you have in your financial forecast. So I'm just repeating the slide to ground us again tonight. You can see that this is from what we call the mini model. It's a summary level version of our financial model, and it shows basically everything lumped into that last line, all other operating. You can see that that is down slightly and had to be in order to accommodate some increases in some of the other transfers and a slight increase over the forecast in the increment for new staffing. You're going to see two different numbers for new staffing tonight, and it makes a big difference whether we're talking about the total that needs to be budgeted to keep that position within the 2019 budget. So that includes salary, benefits, and in some cases, equipment. However, so you get a total cost for that. That's a fully burdened position. However, as we'll talk about later on, we've traded off some positions or we have eliminated some contractual funds that were temporary in this year's budget and then proposed to instead fill it with a full-time employee. And so you get those offsets in the budget, and that's why you'll also see a number that's in the $700,000 range, and that's the net impact to the general fund budget when you take those decreases out. Okay. So tonight we're going to dive in deep on some of the expenditure drivers in the budget. First is salaries, and we meant to add another bullet point to the slide, so I'm going to say it right off the bat. It's not that existing staff salaries are going up 5.2%. This is a combination of a variety of factors. It includes the merit increases, step increases. It may include hiring a position in 1 year that has greater tenure experience than previous that position had, and so you have that incremental difference as well that comes into play from time to time. And most importantly, this also includes those new positions that I just spoke about. So those new positions, net impact to that 2019 preliminary budget is about 36% of the $915,000 that you see on that slide, roughly $328,000. And without those new positions in there, that impact on the salary side of the budget, then this increase would have been $587,000, or roughly 3.3%, which is, I think, closer to what you would assume year over year our increase to be. We budget our salaries at the midpoint of the range for any vacancies that are open. Sometimes we hire a little bit above that, sometimes below. We have a process that we go through to validate when it's appropriate to go above the midpoint with hiring. When we look at salary wage increases, particularly for our non-represented groups, the majority of those are our exempt employees. We look at what's happening in the market. So we do a market assessment, and the city looks at what sort of salary adjustments are being made with our surrounding jurisdictions that we believe are comparables. For example, Bellevue, Kirkland, Redmond, Renton, Sammamish, Tukwila, et cetera. And we also look at data that we get from other salary surveys, whether that's AWC or trend data from the Milliman-Puget Sound Regional Survey, which includes both public and private sector, which is important in some areas of the business that we do. We look at private sector as well. And then we look at what's happening in the consumer price index. And all of that goes into our assessment of what's appropriate for merit increase for the non-represented groups or others. The wage increases for our represented groups, our collective bargaining units, is determined during negotiations, and it's part of the equation. We look at what other requests the unions have made of us. what goals we as the city may have in terms of positions in those negotiations, and we then review those negotiated increases with the council, and the council approves them via the collective bargaining agreement. So you have taken action on those by and large already. IPSA is still in negotiations. That's the only group that we don't have a firm number for quite yet. And then I wanted to mention that you're all aware we're doing a 2-year classification compensation study right now. And we have completed the first phase of that. We're in the second phase right now. The first was to update all of our job descriptions or classifications. And we're reviewing those classifications or changes in job descriptions with employees right now. Second phase that we're in is to make matches to those classifications with the market and then look at the ranges that are appropriate for those jobs. We're also currently working on establishing our compensation goals or our compensation philosophy statement. That's been work that's been underway for a while and has started and stopped a little bit as we embarked on an internal process and kind of cultural revamp that we call the employee experience plan. And so we wanted to integrate the employee experience plan, or the EEP, with the compensation philosophy. So we took a pause on settling on that until that work was done. Once we get the compensation philosophy finished and the market data comes back in, we will have a framework then to decide how to marry up the market data to our compensation goals. And that includes how we will go about making adjustments to ranges, or what recommendations we will make to you about adjusting ranges, whether that's higher or lower than we're at currently. So the next phase after that work involves implementation, and implementation will take some time. We will have opportunities to perhaps move more swiftly with our non-represented employees, and with the bargaining units, we will certainly have to go back and seek their collaboration on any changes that need to be made. And then following that, we will be looking at our policies and our practices. This study isn't just about wages. It's about total compensation as well. And so we'll need to look at what adjustments we need to make on the policy side or benefits structures. We anticipate right now sharing those compensation recommendations with you via probably Services and Safety Committee in the spring, and that would be in advance of budget development season for 2020. That is when we expect we would have some impact from the class comp study.
Council Deputy President Batiste.
Thanks, Emily. I just had a question about, with the 3 studies, you talked about getting data from AWC and from a Puget Sound study and then private sector. So that's the data that you've had in the past, or is this part of the class comp to develop ranges and look at those midpoints?
Yeah, that's our routine annual work to establish typically the merit increase portion of salaries. And the classification compensation study is more about what are those ranges.
So analyzing that
Right.
based on that data. And is that data somewhat all-encompassing between the 3 different areas that you can find all of the positions to do comparables?
I'd have to ask the HR director. I think in part we use multiples because even as we compare across jurisdictions, we may have titles or
That are
a
different.
particular service that a comparable jurisdiction does not. So I think we take a blending. We try to match a certain number of our positions, certainly look at those that are easily benchmarked. Police officer is a good example of that. But where we have more unique ones, we have to work a little harder to find matches.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ray.
So on the class comp study, are we working with somebody external or planning to work with someone external?
We are.
Okay, great, thanks.
Keep going.
Okay, on the benefits side, benefits are, the amount that we're budgeting for benefits is going up less than what you saw on the salary side, an increase of about 2%. The total for the 2019 preliminary budget is represents about 43% of what our salary budget is. So our benefits are a sizable chunk of our budget. Important for us to monitor those trends as well. The amount that it's going up is fairly small year over year, and that's due to a variety of reasons. But before I talk about that, I wanted to share that what we're actually budgeting on a line item basis is about a 7.7% blended rate cost increase for our healthcare, pharmacy, dental, and vision. And that's based on our actuarial report and the actuary's recommendations. And that's a product of the last, say, 36 months of claims. It's also a product of kind of industry or market trends in terms of the cost of healthcare. So it's both claims and utilization, and then plan design and industry trends that go into the cost of our healthcare every year. But we're not seeing 7.7% overall, as you can see on the screen, and the reason for that is, in part, in 2018, we had greater uncertainty about where collective bargaining negotiations might end, and we're conservative in what we had budgeted for 2018. We also didn't quite have clarity yet on some implications in state law. Benefits, I should say, include employer taxes, retirement, deferred comp, and then all the medical that I had mentioned before. 2018 also included our HRA, and in 2019, we will have moved all those groups that we've settled with and the exempt employees off of the HRA. So you get that deduction as well in 2019. So that's the reason for the increase year over year being as small as it is.
Council Deputy President.
Just a question on the HRA being there in 2018, is that pretty significant in terms of having this very low percentage increase? So in future years, that may be higher because we wouldn't have the HRA
Yeah, so
rolling off?
it would be a one-time deduct out of the base. You're correct. I don't have that quantified in front of me. It's a portion of this. I suspect it's not the most sizable component for the small increase there. Yeah. Okay, and we have some new staffing that we are proposing, so I wanted to review that. I'm going to give the overview, and then I've asked department directors to be here tonight to briefly speak with you about the proposed positions and be able to answer any questions you would have about those positions. So the costs that are listed here are those net increases that I mentioned earlier. They do include the net benefits and then any equipment. For example, the maintenance worker for parks is also coming with a truck in order to perform the work. So on the 22nd, during our presentation that evening, we told you the mayor's budget had a focus on people. This is the people side. And we explained that our staffing level has not kept pace with service demands. We've met partially some of the service demands through using contractual help or limited term equivalents, or LTEs. Also use part-time positions. What we have found over the last few years is part-time positions are not quite as cost-effective as they once were. And this is a somewhat difficult topic to talk about, but state law in particular has added more benefits for part-time employees. And so just factually, those positions come with greater cost than they once did. I wanted to define the term repurposed here. This means a few different things. We couldn't come up with one label that was one fits all. So for tonight, repurpose can mean converting contractual services allocation that was in the 2018 budget into one of these proposed positions. Or it could mean returning positions that were loaned from one department to another, and I'll tell that story in a second. Or converting a part-time, non-regular position to a part-time FTE with benefits, and I'll explain why we're proposing that for that position. New does mean a full new FTE position that has been requested. One of these positions in the budget was indeed an LTE that supported citywide IT needs for the last 2 years. That was a request we made to council to support our project development, implementation, and management in IT world. And those borrowed positions in the 2019 budget are being returned to the departments that loaned them out. But the IT project need, project management need still exists going forward. And so I wanted to be clear that we are asking for one of those positions as a full-time regular position in this budget. Unfunded, you see at the bottom there, 2 police officer positions being requested in this budget, and that's at the FTE authority level with no budget attached to them. Again, we had lots of hard choices to make to fit within available revenue, and we'll explain a little further on why we've asked for these positions in this way. Net increase to general fund, as it's stated here and throughout tonight's presentation, is really just that difference between what is in the 2018 revised budget and what is in the 2019 preliminary budget. In some cases, contractual services or LTE costs have been eliminated, and therefore the total cost that's being added to the 2019 budget is less than what you would assume if you added up all of these positions' salaries and benefits on their own. Okay, little small, but this is the story of the LTE positions that were FTEs that were loaned out for 2 years, and what they became, and then what we're asking for this year. So at the top, in the 2016 adopted budget, we had at that point in time a financial services supervisor in the finance department, an administrative assistant in the parks department, and then in PWO, Public Works Operations, we had maintenance worker position. We took whole or part of those 3 positions, that both the FTE authority and the available money for salaries and benefits, and we transferred that to IT in order to fill 2 limited term equivalent positions, one titled project manager and one titled business process analyst. Those 2 positions were in our 2017 and our 2018 budget. Those positions have served us really well, but we made a promise to you. We said these are limited term, and in our vernacular, at the end of 2 years, they typically go away, or we need to come back to you and say, we need to do something different. The need is still there. And so that's what we're doing in 2019. We're returning the 2 positions back to Finance and Parks But as it comes back, we have done a restructuring and priorities being what they are. Now, we're asking to fill it in the finance department as a different title, as budget analyst. And in the parks department, it returns as a maintenance worker. Again, that's where these two departments are feeling the greatest need. And then we are asking for one of those two LTE positions to remain and to be converted into a brand-new position that's a full-time equivalent. And we'll describe those new positions as we go forward. We wanted to give you a little graphic so you could follow along.
Councilmember Winterstein?
Is that it for people, or are you going to have more?
We're going to, now that I'm looking at this, I kind of didn't put this all in the right order. So we're going to take a moment to talk about the other cost expenditure drivers, and then we'll return to staffing. We'll have all these folks in the audience get up and talk about their positions.
Wow, I'm looking forward to that. And maybe while you're progressing, maybe staff can think about this question. I did pose it last meeting as well, is whether or not can you for me characterize in this budget how the salary and benefits component of the budget compares to that financial model that we started working with?
Right. So
If you want to answer that now, that's great. If that needs to come later, I can be patient.
yes, I think we have a little digging to do to pull that out of the more complex model. What I showed it at the beginning of this PowerPoint has it all lumped together in the, I forget what it's called, other departmental costs. So it ends up being a $46 million chunk. So on the whole, we're within forecast, but if I will have to get back to you to look at the more robust model to tell you, just looking at salaries or just looking at benefits, what were the assumptions in the big model?
Thank you.
Okay.
Other questions? Councilmember Ray?
This is just a math problem. So when I look at 2016 adopted, and I count 3 FTEs, and then I see us go down to 2, and then we magically expand back to 3. So how did that happen? I mean, what am I missing? Am I missing something? We were at 2 in the 17-18 adopted.
Correct.
And now we have 3 again, so
Yep.
one net new add?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct. That's correct. So that's why on this slide, you'll see 2 of those positions listed under repurposed. And one of those positions, the senior IT project manager, we're asking for as a new position.
Other questions right now before we move on? All right.
Okay. Great. So another cost driver in the 2019 preliminary budget is tools, as the mayor said in her kickoff speech. We have 3 buckets that we're putting our tools investment in for you tonight. The first is software. These are some of the major software purchases and implementations that we have in the 2019 budget. Recreation, registration, and event software is in progress right now, but will be going live soon. And there's still some work to do on that project as we implement it. Second bullet, customer relationship management, or sometimes referred to as CRM, is a new product that we're wanting to invest in. This will help us to kind of rise up to modern day standards in terms of being able to quickly sort through work orders, complaints, concerns, requests for service, outside of, say, police department that has its own system for handling calls for service. This will allow us to interact with customers on mobile devices more easily, so folks would be able to shoot a picture of a pothole and for a few clicks, send it to us, be geocoded so we can quickly find it, and we'd be able to send a response back to them in that same tool. It's just an example of what that product can provide.
So I have I have a question about this. So in historical standards, this is a fairly aggressive list, is it not, for a year? And I say that understanding that we have ongoing software projects that are still in work, that are a bunch of mission critical systems.
Sure.
And it seems like we're saying we're also going to do a bunch more mission critical systems. And perhaps, I mean, this looks like the sort of the largest improvement project to IT systems that maybe we've seen in 8 years on council, 9 years?
I'm not sure that I can answer that one way or the other. What I can tell you, though, is the last few years, we have been doing more each year. There's trade-offs. In 2018, we may have had bigger modules, and so you can't just compare on a number of them. They each come with their own staffing needs, number of labor hours. Some of them have already been purchased, and now it's just time for us to do the implementation side. Utility billing module is part of our Munis suite, for example. What I would tell you in payroll and grants module is another one of those, so we're just indicating those last two bullets that we're moving into the next modules for Munis implementation. The website upgrade is long overdue, and it's been something that residents have been asking for, businesses have been asking for, and quite frankly had shown up, I think 2 years ago on the work plan, but got displaced for a variety of reasons. So I don't know that the list is necessarily longer than it's been in the last few years. I think the number of labor hours for both the work that we want to do on software implementation, but also, as you'll see in the next few slides, security enhancements and just customer service delivery out of the IT department is bigger, and that's why we have requests for 2 positions in the IT department.
Sure. I just, as part of the conversations we've had before about Arch as well, just the questions about, and when an organization takes on a substantially larger
Sure.
mission, there's always a challenge in that growth, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Councilmember Ray.
So do we have any breakdown in terms of the costs for each of these initiatives and timeline for each of those initiatives?
We do, and I'm going to show you a slide in a little bit. I think it's when John's going to be up here talking that will give you the timeline.
And I'll relax for a bit.
Yeah, and we certainly can give you the costs associated with each of these. I don't think I have it on a slide tonight, but we have that information we can get to you.
Council Deputy President.
So just clarification so the last 2, utility and payroll, are part of the Munis
Correct.
system, so rolling those new modules out. The rec registration already purchased.
Correct.
And so implementing that, and so, but the CRM is new.
Correct. The CRM has not been purchased. Website upgrade, I think we have some requirements under contract to perform that within some amount of time in order for it to still be supported. And I suspect a component of that is included in some of our maintenance fees that we pay now, but not all. You get John to clarify that if I've misspoken.
Thank you.
Great. So also under tools, next year we are focusing on cybersecurity and service to city staff. Under cybersecurity, like all organizations these days, we're trying to stay ahead of threats, and in our case, I'll say, try to get up to where we should have already been on this front. So we're implementing some new tools to manage those threats. We're in the process right now of doing an assessment and are anticipating some recommendations out of that assessment that we've built in some funds, contingency funding in 2019 in order to implement. And then network and device enhancements also on the more hardware side of things. We also have a capital or capital outlay project to continue to invest in our backup system. This has been a multi-year effort, and offsite disaster recovery. And then on the service side, we're always looking for ways to enhance employees' ability to work. And we have a lot of folks that work out in the field, so mobile applications and devices are critically important to their work. Okay, another big piece of our budget every year is professional services. This portion of our budget is going up next year, but approximately $442,000 of that $533,000 is reauthorizations. And so that's work that was in 442. That work that was anticipated in 2018, but may not have gotten done for a variety of reasons, and we'll talk about those reauthorizations in a little bit as well, so you'll have a better understanding of what those are, or the big ones at least. But I'm pointing this out because that number, 442,000, if you think about it, really absorbed about 30% of that new revenue, that $1.7 million. And so that's significant for us to try to reaccommodate those projects again in the 2019 budget. So as we get further into talking about the budget and you deliberate, should you wish to consider funding some additional items that we haven't included in the base budget, and you want to start to talk about maybe use of fund balance to fund one time, one of the things that you can think about to create capacity in your budget is, are there a number of these professional services expenses that are rolling over from 2018 to 2019 that instead of having them come out of your new revenue, you could fund through use of fund balance? Because in essence, in 2018, if it didn't get done, it rolled into fund balance, stayed there, it's available for you. Instead, we have tried to fund it out of the new revenue. So, for example, we're going to talk later tonight about senior center funding and the increment to move from our interim operations, as we've called it, to the long-term model. We have not included that increment in your base preliminary budget for 2019. We have just included the interim model. And so if you wanted to move to the permanent city operations for that program and facility, you could create space for it in your operating budget by taking out a few of these projects from professional services and funding them through fund balance. The other reason I wanted to talk a little bit about this portion of our budget is because in 2019 we're going to have to spend a little bit more time getting more savvy about how we budget for projects. We're going to have to develop a better means for effective resource planning for every special project that we're taking on, so that we can make sure that budget allocations are more fully utilized. Sometimes we're not in control of that. Sometimes we go out to bid for a service and the bids come back higher than we expected. Sometimes community priorities change and we decide to push something to the back burner and take on something different. But I think we could get better at telling you what we think we can accomplish in a given year and what resources are necessary to do it, and then have perhaps a better success rate at getting those projects done. So in professional services, it's not just special projects. Don't think we have $4.6 million of special projects that we're using consultants' help on. We have things like our rec instructors, recreation instructors budgeted here in professional services. So anytime we have a specialized program, we'll hire an instructor to teach that. that's funded out of this budget. This is, you can also think of professional services as being contractual services. We do, though, also budget contract help here for experts, such as geotechnical services sometimes are allocated here, and any other special project that requires some additional external expertise or resources that we don't have access to within our staff. And then sometimes we budget for help that we don't have existing staffing capacity to fulfill. So they may be tasks that if we had the capacity, we could do in-house, but because of the number of projects on the work plan for that year, we have to contract out. So I was going to give just a few examples of what is budgeted in 2019 in this group that's not the normal year-to-year contractual services, like I gave the example of the rec instructors, but the sort of new and different special project variety includes, we've budgeted some funds next year for executive recruitment, understanding that when we go to recruit for those positions, we typically use an executive recruiting firm, and we may have some of those costs next year. Strategic plan tools, some implementation tools, and assistance from our contractors on that. Branding and wayfinding, we have some professional services to help us build that program. Money in here for labor relations, personnel policy updates, our continuing work on healthy communities strategies, the housing strategies, Old Town Code update, urban forest and green Issaquah planning, some contract dollars for space planning, and recommendations on the tenant improvements we've talked to you about, and school pool, transportation demand management, help, a variety of things along those lines. Okay, two more cost drivers that I wanted to point out. These were both on that first slide. East Side Fire and Rescue, you have heard from the chief, his presentation on the EFR budget, and from your reps, your EFR reps. Our cost is going up $437,000 next year due to new implementation of a new model for EFR. On the legal side, I have recommended that we increase the legal budget. We have, for the last several years, spent more than what was budgeted. And so I'm a proponent for better cost accounting and budgeting closer to actuals. And so that's what we're to do here. Here's a list of some of the bigger reauthorizations. We wanted to mention these. State Park EIS is a project we're partnering with the state park on. That work was not completed this year. Again, here's a good example of a project we haven't been wholly in control of. Space planning, we didn't exhaust all of the budget in 2018. And the actual tenant improvements are going to carry over into 2019, and so therefore we just want to move that budget allocation between the 2 years. Impact and mitigation fee update, also carrying over $65,000 of that work to continue work on those fees that we didn't analyze this year. You should note that these aren't total amounts for each of these projects. It's just the amount that we're carrying over. There may be additional increments on some of these that are also proposed in the 2019 budget. And departments are going to speak to a few of these as they walk through their department work plans too. And then some smaller ones, branding, healthy community strategy, sign code update, and the park impact fee update has been separated out.
Councilmember Winterstein?
Do some of these cross over into professional services as well?
Correct.
I'm sorry, do you have another question?
Well, yes, but I'll save it for later.
Okay,
Yeah,
Councilmember Hunt.
This, just to clarify, so when we were back on the professional services slide, that increase was $533,000. I said that most of it was reauthorizations. This is the chunk of reauthorizations, 442 rounded.
Okay, so this is all, the reauthorizations, they're all professional services on this slide.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Hunt.
It was a very closely related question. The amounts that are being asked for professional services, is that also represented here just in a different way, broken down by projects? Okay, so this
Correct.
isn't a separate
Yep, so
cost.
this 442 is the bulk of that $533,000 difference here. But that list is not the entire professional services budget either. Okay.
Doesn't look like there's any other questions right at the moment.
Okay, and then I wanted to point out just a few other noteworthy expenditures. So this one relates to the space planning that we had underway this year. We are carrying over some reauthorized money, but also asking for some additional dollars to perform the improvements that are needed in City Hall Northwest and City Hall. And those are improvements that we discussed with you at a prior work session, but basically those are to make more efficient use of space in the two buildings and to create some more secured areas, better public access as well, and to get some of our records out of the buildings so that we can occupy those spaces for either staff use or public use. Okay, usually we point out new mandates, and I'm happy to say we have relatively few this year on the general fund side. We have some minor implications from Washington State Paid Family Leave Act and things along those lines. But this year, this wasn't part of the rationale for budget year-over-year increases, so I just wanted to highlight that. Another place where we have included some new dollars in the 2019 budget is for strategic plan implementation. We'll talk in a moment about the management analyst proposal, but we have also included, as I mentioned previously, some dollars for professional services and tools that we would like to implement to help us to build a framework for monitoring and reporting on achievements with the strategic plan. And lastly, we've included some funds to do cost allocation and fund reviews. In particular, we're going to focus on Fleet Fund and IT next year. We need to build out a better formula for replacement costs for equipment in these groups. And we also intend to utilize some professional services to help us to examine our budget, hopefully with a new budget analyst as well, and just refine the way in which we are budgeting for our expenses going forward, as we don't anticipate huge windfalls in the future of new revenue. So we just have to get better and better every year at how we go about budgeting. So that's what's included, some highlights on cost drivers, what's been included in the budget. We did also want to point out, because we were working with a limited amount of new revenue, here are some of the hard choices that we made. We did not include funding for some help on the Green Necklace Central Issaquah Code Review and Update. It's one project that we weren't able to accommodate in this year's budget. What I would say about that is it's both an issue of funding, available funding resources, and also staff bandwidth, being able to provide the oversight and participate in this project. However, we think we'll make some progress along these lines of the Green Necklace and Central Issaquah Code, as we are going to be undertaking the first phase of the Chapter 18 code update, municipal code update. And we'll be doing work on the urban forest management plan and tree cover update, and then our trail and park signage and wayfinding program. So all of those may have a little bit of kind of bleed over into this same topic of Green Necklace and Central Issaquah Code Review. So I'm considering that we'll make some headway on the same goals, but not accomplish the full body of work that we had anticipated. Police Department had also made a request to do a full staffing study, and again, largely because of funding constraints, we weren't able to do that, but that's a study that departments do every few years to see if there's different ways to think about how we're allocating our staff, what our staffing needs might be, kind of have a long-term plan for staffing for the department. Another project that we cut, but I think we'll be continuing to make some progress just in-house, is some additional dollars for public notice updates. This would have been, of course, consultant help, and some of that work we can perform in-house. Interns, every year we have a request for interns, and this year we just said, look, there were, as I mentioned to you, there were lots of staffing requests, and we had to say no to many of those, and so we said no across the board on funding interns as well, just as a way to create some equity across departments. A handful of new programs that didn't make it past step one, in part because we had expressed that this is a maintenance type budget and that we weren't going to undertake a variety of new programs and get into new services until after strategic plan had been completed, and we had that direction from community and council. But there were some that we contemplated, and we have great staff who like to be innovative and meet community need, and so they did propose a few. I also wanted to mention that we have not figured out a long-term plan on risk management in the city. And you will recall that we had a position that was combined risk management officer, safety officer, contracts and purchasing officer, and our need on contracts and purchasing has grown so tremendously that last year, for 2018, we actually decided to pull that piece apart and ask for authorization to fill the contracts and purchasing position, and we're in progress with that right now. However, I said at that time that I did not believe that it was going to be a long-term solution for us to have our finance director perform all the risk management work, and it's not. So it's my recommendation that we continue to package up a solution to that. That job is part administrative, but it's also higher level tasks as well. And it's a need that we need to fulfill in a smarter way. So I anticipate at some point coming back to you with a proposal on that, but it is not part of this budget.
Council Deputy President Batiste.
So Emily, you mentioned risk management and safety. Could you talk about the safety? You mentioned risk management, but is there someone covering safety? And when you say safety,
Yes.
what?
Yes, so
define
we're not blindly going about business and not thinking about safety. I don't want to give that impression. We have a safety committee, for example. HR provides most of the staff support for that committee. We're still doing safety briefings and trainings in various departments. But we don't have someone that's looking at our claims history and kind of making recommendations on the way that program should be structured and what it should be focused on. And that higher kind of analytical work is not happening at the moment. So we don't have someone tasked with it, nor do we have the capacity with the existing position. On the risk management side, we're processing paperwork right now. That's what we're getting done. But again, not looking at ways to develop a program where we're better at mitigating risk.
So for now, between HR, finance, and the
Correct.
safety committee, and
Correct.
focused on more
We're
of
piecing
the...
it together to get by.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hunt.
The estimates here, those are coming from the departments that were making the request?
That's correct.
Okay. I am interested if it's possible to get more information about the cost update, the cost estimate on the Green Necklace Central Issaquah Code Review and Update, just to understand the extent of that. And also you mentioned a number of other work plans might overlap. So I'd like to see what all is included in there if it's possible.
Okay, so a scope of work and then sort of break down on how that cost estimate was derived.
Yes.
Okay.
Other questions currently? Nope.
Great. Okay, continuing on with that theme, what's not included? We had additional $436,000 in change of IT requests that we are not funding. Again, we are being selective on which projects we're pursuing. These are the ones that were not included for a variety of reasons. It could be the staffing capacity, it could also be for budgetary reasons. Other IT requests, I meant to take that little bullet off, but that added up to about $52,000 that wasn't included in that 436. And requests with reduced funding, you see the Municipal Code Chapter 18 update there. We had originally thought perhaps we would be able to complete the whole chapter review in 1 year. But again, due to staffing workload constraints, we're now proposing to take on approximately 2/3, I believe, of the work in this year, in 19, and then push the last third into 2020. And sign code update, we took that in-house, basically, and reduced it from a $70,000 budget to just a $20,000 budget, and our staff is going to do most of that work. But there's a piece of that that still requires a little bit of help. As you know, there's been a Supreme Court ruling that we want to make sure we have some legal services assistance on this, too. All right, this is where, sure, Jeff is coming up. He's going to talk to us about Senior Center. And as he comes up here, I'll just remind you, as I said earlier this evening, that what we have in the budget right now is funds to operate the Senior Center as we're operating it right now, in sort of that temporary interim mode. And Jeff's going to walk us through what would be required to move to long-term if that's council's desire.
Thank you, Emily. Good evening. Yeah, I'll try and highlight sort of the bullet points and the budget comparison here to start the conversation. As Emily mentioned, what is in the proposed budget right now is sort of an assumption of continuing the interim operation. What through the conversations we've certainly had with you as council and we've had with the community, and as we've had with the mayor's office in formulating this budget, it's becoming clear that operation where we've borrowed some positions from within the department, we really have one full-time staff person there. That's not necessarily an operating model built to last. So the recommendation that was certainly presented by the mayor and is reflected here in this slide, will really allow us to create and start to look at this, should the city be the direct operator, positioning ourselves, positioning the organization, positioning the operation to be able to sustain that and create the functionality that we want within that facility to better respond to community need, to add some program capacity that we're really have been bumping up against as the community has wanted some additional programs there. The table within this slide is a real quick budget comparison as we look at some of the breakdowns of expenditure types and revenues. You'll see the preliminary budget represents the interim operating model as it's in the budget right now. Obviously, as you look at as we consider transitioning to long-term operation, there is an increase in salary and benefits, and obviously an increase in other operating expenses. Total expenses are increased by about $120,000, but as well the revenue and our capacity for generating revenue and seeking revenue. This revenue would be everything from building-based classes and programs to rentals, our capacity for renting that facility in off hours, and also seeking grants, donations, and whatnot. We see and would estimate increasing our revenue production from $51,000 a year to $143,000, as you see. What that means to us in terms of a net investment, expenditures versus revenues, right now is projected in the interim, we're at about a $361,000 net investment that we're proposing in the 2019 budget. To transition to that long-term operation, we'd be looking at about a $34,000 increase to a net investment of $395,000. As we look at cost recovery as one pro forma, what you would see is an increase in cost recovery from about 12% to 26%, allowing some additional staff, allowing those hours, allowing that capacity allows us to generate more revenue, which in turn allows us to hit probably a more comparable cost recovery target with other city-operated senior centers. This model would also include a need for 2 FTEs, are included in this model, a supervisor and a coordinator position. We'd be glad to speak to this further if we're having further conversations as deliberations go, but we would certainly see an increase in outputs, really in 4 key sectors of outputs: in program outputs, in volunteer outputs, increase in volunteers, our partnerships, our ability to bring in other providers and partner and really expand the program portfolio through partnerships would increase. And as I said earlier, rental outputs would certainly increase. And then I mentioned cost recovery already. So with that.
Councilmember Winterstein, you look like you're poised with a question.
Well, you could read my mind. Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. I have a couple questions, starting a simple one. Estimated revenue. How does that number of 143, so on the long-term option, compare to revenue we get from other parks facilities that we rent, do other things for?
How does it compare in terms of a number? In terms of, I mean,
Guys,
the
I don't have any more
facility?
detail. I just see revenue, and I know we get revenue for Tibbetts Manor, other places.
Yeah, it would compare, this would be less than the Pickering Barn or the Manor, but again, this facility is not primarily a rental facility. It's a senior center.
How does it, so, okay, it's less.
Yeah.
What are those other numbers? I mean, just give me, off the top of your head.
I'd have to get back with you on that. Would you be interested in knowing on an hourly, what we'd anticipate in terms of like an hourly rental charge, or?
Like you said, it's not available all the time, right? We're going to have some of our own programming in there, and there's going to be shoulder time. It's going to be evenings and weekends, what have you. And it would be good, I would think of something like Pickering or the Manor, perhaps there are others that we also get revenue from as well. I just don't know where this, if we can find a way to compare, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
It is the first time I've seen that number. I think we asked you this kind of last time we talked about seeing some more of a pro forma of what this might look like. And this is it. And this, I don't know if there's more detail anywhere in this budget, but you just mentioned a few things. And so it made me wonder how this compares to revenue from the other sources.
I'd be glad to bring that comparison. I can tell you rental revenues with it, what rental revenues represent in that 143,000 is a pretty small number as well. I would say a majority of that number is, it's a pretty healthy mix of rental revenue, but also grants, donations, our ability to go out and get additional grant revenue.
I would appreciate that level of detail.
Yeah.
Like I said, if it's already somewhere else, and if you just want to provide it in written form, and we can review it and see if we
Yeah.
have any further questions. One of the things it's in my mind, Jeff, and I don't know if you were here in late 2015, but I think that was the last year we said, okay, senior center, we got $99,000 for you. That was our budget.
Yeah.
And then something interesting happened after that. And then we held that. And I don't have in my mind then all the other numbers in 16 and 17, but clearly, I mean, this is substantially more than what we used to spend.
Yes.
So it's not apples and apples, but it's, in the end of the day, it's a senior center, it's programs. There are volunteers, there are partnerships that were involved then. It's different programs. I certainly know that when you can provide perhaps, two quality capable individuals for the positions that you're asking for, I would expect that to be different than what was there previously, but it used to cost us $99,000 a year.
Right.
So this is important, and for me, it's not just going to be this one slide in consideration, because this is now you're asking us potentially to go big, I would say, with the long-term option. And to be comfortable with this ask and understanding what's behind it in comparison for where we were a few years ago, any additional, other additional information, such as, give me this revenue, that's a pretty big revenue number, by the way. If it's very little of it's rental, then in grants, then I want to be comfortable with what makes up that number, however that can be presented. You can break down every one of those lines. You said salary and benefits, I assume that's 2. That's what you have up there. Operating expenses, maybe we had those in years past, but we didn't account for them. I know 99 was a grant, and at the same time, we did manage that facility, and I think maybe paid for utilities. So helping me understand how these operating expenses may be compared to what we've had historically. So the holistic picture, I understand. Here's the first big ask that I think that commits us longer term potentially, and so further breakdown of the information I would appreciate.
Appreciate it gladly. And if I could add, because I know this is something administration and Parks has talked a lot about, and really even framing this and wanting to bring this into budget deliberations as a recommendation, realizing really behind this is a more significant policy decision of yours in terms of how to operate. So we understand, and I guess I expect the need for further conversation and deliberation on this. Yes.
Well, I appreciate that. And the policy question we have been considering, and even in the recent months, right? You did the RFQ or what have you, and this feels like a progression, but yeah, once you put numbers upon it, you're formalizing certain policy, and so it is a blended decision. We feel like we're doing so. Thank you for mentioning that. So it does add a little bit more importance to the additional information.
Councilmember Ray.
So can I pile on Councilmember Winterstein's line of questioning? So the 365 for the salaries and benefits, so if that's 2 FTE?
And it's part-time staff as well.
Okay, thank you. So just kind of having some data around that, because it looked disproportionate.
Yep.
Other questions? No? Nope. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. Before I transition off of this slide, I'll just mention, we gave you the net cost increase, but of course, we have to adjust revenue, and then we go and adjust expenditures. So on the expenditure side of the budget, if you wanted to move in this direction with this budget, we would be, for example, having to add $126,000 worth of expenditures. So I just want to make sure that was understood before we move on.
Thank
Okay.
you for that clarification.
All right, now we're going to talk staffing. You've seen most of these numbers, all of these numbers before, I believe. I wanted to point out there's one slight difference. In the materials that we gave to you a couple of weeks ago, we had that little table down at the bottom. On the LTE line for 2019 preliminary, instead of 3.29, we had 3.16. And that was an error where we had not included that small amount of limited term that the mayor's office had requested in the 19 budget, and that's just to extend the special projects coordinator for the first 3 months of the year to help us get through our staffing shortage in that office. So I want to tell you, if you go back and look at that table, you'll need to scratch out that cell and add 3.29 in there instead. So again, the new positions are the ones we are proposing to newly add, but we also talk about all these positions in terms of conversions or repurposing, which I defined earlier. 2 of those are loans from IT. And so this is the big picture. And you can see from this that in 2019, the FTE count is going up, but the LTE count is going down. And we talked about that a little bit last time, how our staffing component has always been a blend of full-time equivalents, limited term equivalents, part-time, overtime, contractual services. I don't even know what else I'm missing, but we just find a way to pull all the staffing resources together out of a variety of different means. So we're going to walk through each of the proposed positions, starting with the positions we're calling conversions. So these are...
Can I get you
Yeah.
to rewind to that one just for
Sure.
a second? Just want to do a little crosswalk so I can understand. So if I add up all those numbers up above, I get 2 and then 3.5 and then 2 more, or 3.5, or 2 plus 1.5 is 3.5, plus 5 is 8.5. I'm just trying to make that those numbers up above foot to the numbers in the far right column on the bottom, which comes out to about 5.75 net, right? Roughly?
It adds, if you take that net change for that repurposed position, you have to use that number and you get to the 10.5.
So not the repurpose, so the limited term and,
The net change, 1.5, plus a 5, plus a 2.
1.5. Got it. And then what about the LTEs that go away? Can those be captured in the 2 that are being converted there?
They would be, yes. They're part of the deduct of that 4.71.
So where the other 2.7 come from?
I'd have to get back to you
Okay.
on where we're not moving forward with those.
All right, that's great, thanks.
Sure.
Other questions right now?
Okay, so LT to FT in our vernacular. First one is building inspector, and I'm just going to briefly hit the highlights on this position. We filled it as a limited term in part because the construction world ebbs and flows, and our staffing need has, changed with the market as well. But we have not seen a slowdown on our building inspection needs for some time, and we have been getting by with limited term employees, but it's becoming more difficult in this market to attract and retain limited term employees. And so that's the primary reason why we are proposing to change this from an LTE to an FTE is the workload is definitely there. It's actually continuing to grow, and we'd like to be able to, once we've trained people, keep them on board and continue to see that good work happening in our community. And Keith gave us a little rundown on justification for the needs. Again, I think I've expressed that here. And the benefits is it just allows us to continue to ensure that projects in the community are being inspected in a thorough way, in a timely way, and that we're also responsive to any growth impacts by making sure that these properties, as they're being constructed, are in compliance with our city codes.
Councilmember Hunt.
For this position, converting from FTE to LT to full-time, there's no cost associated with that, is that correct?
Sure. So, yeah, on that first...
How is that possible?
Right. Very good question. I think, and I don't have the backup on that, but in some cases, the total cost for a position, say in 2018, may have been at that mid-range, and may have been, we budget for the most conservative scenario on healthcare expenses, for example. So we assume the most expensive plan for family coverage. And it may be that the individual that we have in that LTE position now was hired at less than midpoint on the range and may have different health coverage, and that difference makes up the cost differential, because we're just talking about an increase on the benefits side of the equation. Typically, when you go from an LTE to an FTE, it's just a limited amount of new benefits that come into play for an FTE position.
Okay, so on the next one, which we can talk about on the next one,
Sure.
I'm sort of wondering why that one.
I'm going to
there's
cover
a
that one too, so
different
let's do
situation
that.
going on with that position.
yes, there is. Okay. So the next one that is also a conversion is management analyst in the mayor's office. And in 2018, we have 2 individuals working part-time, part-year. We had a dollar amount that council approved for those 2 part-year, part-time positions, and that was $100,000. So the increment, the change here is by taking those positions from limited term to 2 part-time, part-year LTEs to 1 full-time equivalent full year is basically the difference in the benefits cost, largely. It's a little bit, I'm looking at the numbers now, it's roughly half of that cost, net cost increase goes toward benefits, and the other half goes towards salary. So that's the numbers side. On the need side, we are requesting this position to help us with the reporting that we do citywide on the citywide work plan, on performance measures, and going forward on our strategic plan. Don't have a position tasked with that body of work. We also don't have one position tasked with coordinating all of our legislative affairs and responding to lobbyist needs for information from the city so that they can be successful in bringing home projects. And so the management analyst would be the conduit for that work. We have weekly requests for data and information, whether that's from internal departments across department lines or in service to community or to council. And it would be very helpful to have a management analyst who is performing that work. That's often very time-intensive kinds of work, and I know I have benefited from the two individuals performing this work for us right now over the last few months. And they have produced materials that you have seen. In fact, a lot of the work that you're seeing tonight is a product of their work. And we would assume that the management analyst would also help follow up on tasks that are going to other positions in the department, whether that's helping with customer service inquiries or performing tasks that either the mayor or I or deputy city administrator would do, but probably would be better performed, more cost-effective to be performed by management analysts. But in a nutshell, we're hoping this position will move us forward in terms of our ability to produce data, provide recommendations, synthesis of information, and the public reporting that we want to do into the future. And also, very importantly, provide a resource for us to be successful in our strategic plan implementation.
Questions?
Okay, moving on to that next bucket, which was a mixed bag we're calling repurposed positions, and we're going to start with budget analyst. So this is a position that would be the result of returning one of the IT positions, IT limited term positions. And the finance department has proposed budget analysts to assist with monitoring our revenue and expenses and providing status reports on that, whether that's to council or internally to departments or the executive office. This person would do some of those analytical duties that we haven't had the capacity time-wise to get done as frequently as we would like to. I'll point out one of those is just being better prepared for negotiations with labor or thinking about our annual budget needs on how to forecast salaries and benefits. And then I think I mentioned assisting us with the ongoing reports that need to come out of the department. We, right now, I think what I'll point out on this is we've used some consulting services to help us get by in this realm this year and in past years. And certainly this work has sidelined finance director at times or our budget manager at times, and they haven't been able to perform other work doing this analytical tasks. I think I'll stop there.
Councilmember Ray.
Can you just roll back one?
Yep.
So the total cost, so I'm assuming that's salary and benefits, but I think that's too much for salary and benefits, so I'm kind of curious what else is buried in the total cost.
It is just salary and benefits.
Okay. That seems awfully high. Even if I calculate benefits at 40-some% of comp, that's pretty high. So,
Yeah,
but that's what it is. That's what it is. I'm just.
And what I will tell you is benefits is not at 40%, and the number that I'm looking at, it's actually higher.
But benefits includes things like payroll tax and.
Includes
those things.
everything. Yep. Yep. The salary number that I have in front of me is just shy over 92,000.
Councilmember Hunt, you look like you have a question.
No, I was just surprised by the amount of the benefits percentage.
Yep, it is high.
I mean, I've seen, in many places, I've seen 50% used as a bogey. It's not unusual. Other questions?
Okay, Jeff's coming up.
All right, continuing on with these proposed repurposed positions, as this position would be coming back to the Parks Department, we really see the need to address what is our greatest need currently, and that is adding some capacity within our park operations team. Total cost at $148,000. This is inclusive of salary, benefits, and equipment. So there's a van purchase that or a truck purchase that was referenced earlier. This group really is responsible for stewarding our parks, our trails, our open space, as well as landscape medians. Often, I think, overlooked. The Parks Department oversees a lot of those more landscape beds within our right-of-way. This need really, I think more than anything, reflects the growth of the system over the last 10 years, in that we've added about 235 acres to our system, to our parks, open space, and trail system, and yet we have not increased staff. And so we're really seeing the effects of that throughout the system in terms of our level of service and our ability to respond to needs, our ability to respond to just the upkeep on the system. At the same time, as that need, as growth has occurred the last 10 years, we also have new infrastructure coming online next year. One that I noted is about 3 acres of landscaping beds and medians that will become part of our ongoing maintenance responsibility with what's going to be a great new piece of infrastructure of Southeast 62nd roadway. As we continue to add acres and add to our system, add functionality to our system, we certainly want to make sure we're aligning staffing resources to address the need and make sure we're not eroding the level of service throughout the system. In terms of benefits, this certainly allows us to, I think, meet the maintenance expectations, the level of service expectations of our residents. It also, as we look at measuring and comparing ourselves from a standard amongst some of our peer and neighboring cities, it moves us closer to that standard. I would note we still would not be at that standard or at that comparison with this one additional staff person.
I don't see any questions. We can move on.
Okay.
Okay, good, thank you. Thank you. Human Resources is requesting one additional, sorry, can you hear me? We're requesting one additional FTE, a Human Resources Analyst. The reason we're requesting this is actually the increase that we're experiencing in recruitment. We've seen a 300% increase in recruitment over the last 5 years, which has substantially increased our workload in Human Resources. The workload increases has impacted our time to fill vacancies, which impacts programs and service interruptions that we see throughout the city. The additional position will help us to reduce these interruptions that we're now seeing. Last year, you funded a temporary position for us. However, based on what we're anticipating with recruiting, we anticipate that this is going to go on for several years based on our demographics, our employee demographics. So an additional FTE is a more permanent solution to the problem. The city currently has 3 positions in human resources. In a comparison that we did with other cities throughout the region here, we found approximately 4.3 positions supporting the same number of employees. So with the additional FTE, that brings us up to what we see in comparable cities. We've asked for additional funding for professional services for next year to address recruiting issues. If the additional FTE is approved, then we would be reducing professional services requests by $70,000. Any questions?
May I just add a clarification? We actually took that contractual services amount out of the 2019 base budget. So just to clarify, it's not in there now. If this position is not funded, we will be asking for the contractual services dollars back because we need it to keep afloat.
Councilmember Winters.
Thank you. Last year at budget, we heard about a couple organizations, certainly Parks and Finance, went through a reorg with some new structure. Did your organization do that as well? Did you make any changes? So this is not filling out a new structure. This is just in response to
Yes.
core service of what you do.
Yeah. We don't have much of a structure when we have 3 people, so, yeah,
Right.
so we
Yeah,
didn't do
and
any restructuring.
Just saying, I've been reviewing kind of some of the things that we considered last year. There's programs, there's people, and that's why, and I couldn't find anything about that. I had a vague memory, maybe we did, so
Yeah.
thank you for answering that.
Council Deputy President Batiste.
Just had a question, Lori. So the title is Human Resource Analyst. It sounds like it's mostly focused on recruiting. Is it sort of a hybrid type of role, doing analyst work and
Yeah.
recruiting?
This would be more flexible, so we can use the position for other reasons as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Other questions? All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, I'll cover this one. In support services, we run a passport application processing service, and right now, we have a part-time, non-regular, or PTNR, as we call it, position that is providing the bulk of the customer service office hours for this program, and that position, we are expecting we would have turnover in it because it comes without benefits in that PTNR status in our pay plan. So we are requesting to convert it from that status to part-time FTE. So no increase in hours, just in the type or status of the employee and therefore the eligibility for benefits. That's the change here.
Questions? Councilmember Ramos.
Yeah, so the total cost is $70,000 versus the net cost. Can you explain that? I'm assuming you're saying that the added cost is just for benefits.
Correct.
And so explain that a little bit more. So $46,000 worth of benefits, additional 25,000 for if it's already been done with the non-regular position.
Right. The total cost of the salary is only a fraction of the total cost of the benefits, is the math there.
Math, 25 to 45, okay. Again, and the program overall has how many folks working in Passport?
There's only one dedicated part-time
Part-time.
person, but our support services division, the individuals in that unit rotate in and out to cover, provide backup or cover additional appointments.
And then one last question, it says increase revenue may offset cost. What revenue comes in with that program?
We take fees for that service, and it's possible from having the consistency in that position that we might be able to bring in more revenue.
Okay.
Other questions?
Got to advance to the next slide, but I think you know what they do. Okay, and next we're going to cover the new positions. And I'm going to speak briefly about financial analysts. This is in the finance department. This is total new position. That's why the net cost and the total cost is one and the same. This position would do two things. It would provide backup for our only payroll position. We have a position called payroll coordinator. I think on the second slide I called it payroll tech, but I was wrong. It's payroll coordinator. And that's a delicate position for us to be in. In fact, we're having transition in that position right now, and we don't have a second position that routinely is involved in payroll processing. So it's a risk for us, and now it's a risk that's come home to roost. And so we're recommending to get two positions responsible for payroll. The first position is that payroll coordinator would be responsible for kind of day-to-day administration of payroll. The financial analyst would be backup for when that person is gone, but also provide higher level functions, including helping to review end of payroll reports, do end of year sort of auditing, discover any trends that we need to turn our attention to, help prepare data for collective bargaining changes in law. We've had several of those. They can be sometimes complex to add to our payroll system, run scenarios for us so that we can be better at providing the payroll function. This year, we did have some temporary assistance to just get by on basic backup needs on payroll. We've identified those in the second bullet here, but didn't have the capacity to do some of those higher level analytical tasks. And again, that's what this position would be primarily tasked with, but also give us that backup in payroll so we're not in such a delicate position in the future.
Councilmember Winterstein.
I have too many windows open, so pardon me. I was looking at a couple different things. I was looking last year, and just like I asked Lori a moment ago, we did get a presentation about like a restructure within finance. So that
Yes.
this position, financial analyst, I was looking at last year's org slide proposal. There's no position name the
Correct.
same. And I don't want to get hung up on the names too much. I think it says fiscal analyst or something
Correct.
like that is the name that's in that org slide. But it does show some unproposed positions, unfunded last year for this year.
Correct.
So if I were to cross, when it went at the whole position chart, would I be able to see financial analysts, payroll benefits, or was it the old name that's in the last?
Yeah, it may be the old, I'd have to look at that too. It may be the old name, and it might be financial supervisor in an old org chart that we moved away from when we created the division structure.
So perhaps just getting clarity on that, but also the upshot is that there was, again, because last year it was provided as a structure and it gave justification for management positions within it, and I got all that. And is this just filling in some of those identified but previously unfulfilled spots, or is there any
Yes.
other kind of changing going on?
No other changing.
Okay, because I think there was like 5 positions that were identified but not filled last year.
Yeah, I believe budget analyst is one of those. I'd have to go back and check that chart, too.
Budget analyst is one of them, yes.
Other questions right now? Nope.
Great, thanks. John's coming up for the next.
Okay, so the first one is the network analyst, and this would be the resource for our network and infrastructure support. Lead the design and implementation of our cybersecurity tools, standards, and processes, and also be responsible for end-user cybersecurity training. And we'll work with to do solutions with department directors and managers as various projects come up that are infrastructure related, and is part of our focus on maintaining a quality of service. The next slide. Next, thank you. So our city's infrastructure is, on the network side, it's grown extensively over the last 5 years, and we don't really have the resources to address this increase in demand. So there's a lot of mobile devices, there's lots of Internet of Things devices like cameras, remote sensors, just an increase in total number of applications on servers, the cloud-based applications as well. So part of this is that we've not really been able to stay on top of our SLA and meet our service delivery goals, especially for the high priority items, just because we don't have enough resources to stay on it. So this has also limited our ability to stay on top of cybersecurity at the standards we would like to. So we have been relying on vendors and doing, so far so good strategy. But unfortunately, while in a lot of the infrastructure space, the labor to maintain it has gone down through modernization, cybersecurity has more than outstripped that savings in increased labor required to stay on top of it and protect the assets of the city. So the benefit of this position, we'll be able to keep pace with the cybersecurity world of threats as they happen, reduce some liability there if we get certification status. We'll also get just improved IT performance and network reliability and capacity as we increase our services and applications that operations of all the different various departments need. And the next slide is, or is there any questions on that one? Nope. And this one is the Senior IT Projects Manager. So this was the LTE that was brought in for the Munis program. This is our primary resource for technology project management. Works with the department directors and managers to create the project roadmaps, supports the IT manager in development of city technology plans and portfolio, and then assists departments with vendor selection, design, and implementation of technical solutions, and is responsible for delivering the large technology projects on schedule and on time and on budget. So this scale and complexity of our technology portfolio is driving annual large projects into the foreseeable future. And the city departments really lack the resources and skills to manage these large technology projects. And so with project oversight of delivery, like things like utility billing, customer relationship management, and cloud-based disaster recovery solutions, in 2019, there's also benefit of guidance and discovery for replacement of other major applications, such as the maintenance management and asset management system, and others in the future. And so we go to the next slide. I believe we have a map of that. So this is a three-year overview of the major projects that are currently in the hopper. Some of these are proposed as part of the budget. Some of them have to happen for other reasons. So Perfect Mind is essentially 95%. So they're going to be going live, soft go live next month, and full go live by the start of next year as they wind down programs that were still in the old system and ramp up everything else on the new platform. Utility billing is a year-long project that has we tried to start it a couple times. We do have some additional backfill on the finance side, so they have capacity to actually work on that project. So next year we plan to, take us about most of the year to get that deployed. CRM is another large project that touches a lot of departments. The application itself is not really large, but it's the coordination of a lot of departments that would use and respond to requests from our citizens. And then the city website, it was heard it earlier, we're at the end of, so it's hosted by a vendor, but they are demanding we upgrade it by the end of next year or else they won't support it anymore. So we've been putting it off, and we have to do it. So if we're going to do it, we're going to need to look at our content and how it's arranged and improve the usability of the site. It's within a range, it's a template, so you can't do anything, but we haven't really visited how the content is organized. So there's some of the consulting that's going to go with that will be around working with the departments of how we can arrange our information in that site.
John, I have a question about that. The last time that we did this, that was before you took over as director, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So maybe it's not fair to ask you this question, but there were a lot of consultants. There were a lot, and they gave us a lot of, I felt like, presentations, and there was going to be a lot of sort of, defining of what the website was going to be and making sure the community got what it needed, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a sensitive point to me because it's easier for me to go out to Google and search things from the city's website from Google than it is to search it on the city's website. So how do we avoid, again, you weren't there the last time, but how do we make sure we get to, and you're already sort of setting expectations by saying we're in sort of a box and there's a limit to how extensively we can make improvements. But like, I want to be as good as Redmond and Kirkland. That's where I want to be. Oh, that look in your face makes me really, really nervous.
They got staff, and they got a considerably larger budget that used for their public website. We have made a decision that it wasn't economically sensible for our city to custom build anything. So that's why we go with a hosted template approach to try to keep the scope within a box. Otherwise, it can get really expensive when everybody's wish lists come to fruition, as you know, as you've been involved in major software projects. So I think that was one of the decisions back when they made their purchase. That was 2014 or 13 or something like that. So anyway, I don't know that we're going to go down that whole discovery with a public process this time. This will be, the main customer is the communications department. We're just going to be doing the project management and facilitation to make sure that all the other departments get their requirements put in place and that things flow with the vendor. So one of the key roles of this project management role is holding vendors accountable to deliver. Because if it's nobody's responsibility, then nothing happens, right? If it's everybody's responsibility, you don't get there. So you have to have a person say, I'm going to hold this vendor to what they say. So anyway, and then you go into 2020, there's another series of projects going on. The B&O tax software was delayed due to a vendor change where the vendor we had lined up it was a company that was going to form, they didn't form. So the product became unsupported, but that's going to resolve itself, we hope, by then. So, any other questions?
Questions? Councilmember Hunt.
There's a focus on cybersecurity and increasing our cybersecurity in the city and the various technologies that the city has. So how would that fit? Does that sort of encompass all of this, or how does that fit into this timeline as a project and an emphasis?
So some of that is incorporated in just putting in these new projects, but most of that is with the new position for the network analyst would also own the programs that are really, there is training, user training, but there's also just a lot of internal systems monitoring. And the thing that's changed in cybersecurity is it used to be good scanning at the edge, block them before they get in, and that isn't really effective anymore. You have to be looking at your stuff inside all the time. Because of things like phishing emails and social engineering, it's nearly impossible to keep out hackers. So you have to have internal guards going and all kinds of steady monitoring. And so somebody has to do that work. You can automate some of it, but you can't automate all of it. Somebody has to actually pay attention to the logs when it says, this doesn't look right, it needs investigation.
Councilmember Ray.
Two things. One is, that's a whole ton of work to pick up on President Martz's comment earlier. That's a whole ton of work to do in 2019. I mean, that's a very full work plan, and it would be interesting. I mean, it seems like what I'm hearing from you, John, is we're kind of in a box on all of this stuff.
Well, I try to keep the scope within a range, yes. That is one of the goals of portfolio management, which is one of the goals for the project manager to maintain that.
Yeah. I mean, just given the size of our IT staff and our history and all that, that seems like a lot to me. But the second thing, which is a question and sort of an ask, is do you have some dollar figures associated with each of these that kind of capture the
I
order of
don't have the
magnitude?
slide. I know he's got that information, so I can get that for you later.
That'd be super. Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Winterstein.
Yeah. John, as I said earlier, I am kind of going back and looking what we were asked last year in some of these areas. And since this is one of the key themes of people and tools, and especially IT tools being an area of emphasis that the mayor put on this, and staffing as well, a couple of additions as well. Perfect Mind is one of 5 bullets that we considered last year. At the same time, there was, I am kind of, I noticed that Questica is not up there. I see the B&O, which was from last year, is now in 2020. There was something called parts barcode tracking, Asset Works. I don't know what happened to that. There's applicant tracking, and there's the workflow automation and Nintex or Nintex.
So the last 3 are all, well, the barcode one starts next month, but the other 2 are completed already.
I'm sorry?
They're completed. So the applicant tracking is live, and the barcoding one starts next week, so the vendor will be on site in November to do that. That's in the automotive shop for parts barcoding. And what was the third one?
There's workflow automation, Nintex?
So that's put in place as well.
I'm sorry, that's...
Yes, that's in place as well.
Okay, all right. And what's, and I saw earlier on the one slide, kind of completion of the budget software, the Questica. What's the status on that?
Well, you've seen some of the outputs of that already in some of the reports from finance. So that is running. We have the instance up there. We loaded the data from Munis for historicals that built out the budget in the app for this year. But it needs, another cycle of iteration, which we'll be doing next year to, use it, expand it, and make it more user-friendly. And possibly, I don't know. I haven't got the full roadmap on that yet, so.
Okay, yeah, we've heard a few things about it being perhaps even something that there would be a UI where we could actually interact with data as well.
Yeah.
And
So finance is our customer for that. We'll implement what they want to implement. So I'm not sure exactly what their feature set is planned.
okay, so there's a couple. I'm sorry, I didn't write all these down. There's still some from this year that are spilling into next year that I don't think they're all on there. And some that are already done from last year. And the reason I'm kind of going down this is that this is a big part. This is an expansion, right? People and tools. Maybe more than once a year would be good, but this is my first opportunity in a year to kind of get an update on what we were asked about and asked to fund last year. And how well we've done and how this plan with your resourcing plan and what maybe prevented you from completing or what you needed to complete now. I mean, that story, that narrative, that would be really good to back up the peoples and tools theme of this. And in addition to the projects that we've already mentioned, there were a number of UNIS phases that, and I'm looking at, there was the chart of accounts, there was citizen self-service, utility billing, there's Perfect Mind there. And I think some of those are still, I see them now in the 2019 budget. So I have this kind of image in my mind of a whole bunch of things that were like on the work plan for 2018. And we got some of them, and some of them we didn't, and some of them are slated for the forward, like the B&O tax software, for example. So I'm just trying to get, given how this is an emphasis on this budget, a more complete picture of what we've accomplished compared to what we set out to do last year, how that fits, and then so I can get a sense of, because I think that, I get the network analyst position. I get project management positions really well. And I've done it, I've planned it, I've hired it. And you still have a really big work plan for 2019. But I don't have a sense from this information yet that between what we committed to do, what we say we're going to do in 2019, and the staffing, that we've really got things lined up, because there's still things that are not on this chart. So I think it'd be great that we really set ourselves up, that we had a plan that we were going to be successful for in 2019. Do we have the right enough staff, or are we trying to bite off too much? Because CRM is going to cost something new, and I haven't even asked anything about CRM yet. That's not an insignificant project at all, because you haven't said anything about master data, because everybody in there is probably somebody who's also in utility billing, because I'll probably be in CRM, I'll be in parks, I'll be in utility billing. Mm-hmm. What about employees? I think there's some wraparound projects on this as well, and maybe something like that would be a really important investment for us to make. So I have all of those questions trying to understand this, because this is a major theme of this budget. And I want to make sure that the package, what we've done, what we're planning to do, and the staffing is really the right plan.
So we can prepare a little bit more information to tell that story. What I can tell you tonight, just in a nutshell, is that IT department has spent quite a lot of time trying to put together the resource plan to accomplish this scope of work. Okay. And they've looked at it on a position-by-position basis. They've looked at it on a project-by-project basis. In order to accomplish this scope of work, we need those two positions. If we don't get those two positions, we will have to go back and cut several of these projects. That's the only way that we're going to get this scope of work done. But we can certainly go back and I think you largely covered last year and where we're at, but we can kind of synthesize a bit more of that information. In particular, we can tell you for some of those pieces that are moving from 18 and continuing into 19, or moving 19 to 20, we can explain why.
Yeah, and to be perfectly clear, I feel like it's just part of my duty as a council member. Like there was an ask in front of us last year, and we said okay, and this is my chance to get an update. Sure. This is good, but it tells only part of the story.
Right. This was only meant to be 19.
And at the other side of it as well is that I know how critical people are to the success of these type of projects. So do we really so give me more to help me understand that we've got the right plan in place. And I'm looking at CRM, so that's the one that's all new, right? That's completely new. And I have some experience with those as well, and they're non-trivial. And so what is, do we, so being able to see a more detailed plan about, because peoples and tools, here's what we got, here's what we're going to do, here's our people plan for this. I would like to see that in more detail.
Okay, we have a matrix that shows which FTEs are allocated to which projects. We can summarize that since it's way too long and complicated to look at, and get that to you.
Other questions? No. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and Brett is coming up.
Okay, thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thanks for your time tonight, and thank you, Emily, for a great segue into my presentation when you mentioned potholes. So we're going to talk about potholes, sort of. Can we get the next slide up, please? Yeah, there we go. Thank you. So I want to talk to you about a proposal for a street maintenance worker position. This position handles maintenance in roadway, street, sidewalk, path, in traffic control devices, street cleaning, roadside maintenance, things along that line. Next, please. So it's been 10 plus years and over 30 lane miles since we last added a street maintenance worker, and it's definitely time to do that. We're now over about 3,800 maintenance hours short of where we should be, and that equates to about roughly 2 maintenance workers. In this particular proposed budget proposal, we are asking for 1 maintenance worker position for the street department. Next slide, please. So what we have here is a display of 3 recent traffic calming projects. That includes Old Town, Issaquah Highlands, and Second and Bush. And these are relatively small projects, but together we're looking at an additional ongoing maintenance impact of about 55 hours a year just on those 3 little projects. And every project, whether it's public or private, large or small, has maintenance requirements associated with it, and that's what we're seeing with these types of projects. So every time we add something to the system, like a tubular marker, or a street sign, or a raised pavement marker, or really any other item, they all take maintenance, and they all take ongoing maintenance, and it's cumulative in our particular case. So these items just keep getting added to the system year after year after year. And so we're in a position where we are looking at adding a street maintenance worker position to keep up with this ongoing maintenance need. Thank you for your time. Any questions?
Nope. Thank you. Great props.
I just want one quick question. So did you borrow those, or those, do you have to take them back tonight?
Not tonight.
All right, and Sheldon is here to talk about a position that is being requested. However, it is a position that's in the stormwater fund, but we thought with all the departments here talking about the positions, and since this is the only position outside of general fund, we'd have Sheldon talk about it now.
Thank you. One last word for Brett. Actually, his crews are going to reinstall those devices tonight, even though they're all broken. But
And it's raining.
As Emily mentioned, Public Works Engineering is requesting an environmental science assistant. This position handles some inspections, educational programs, as well as compliance with the stormwater permits that we've been granted by the state, or I should say promulgated to us by the state. Some of the things that the position would be working on are the municipal stormwater permit, private facilities inspections, local source controls, critical aquifer recharge area programs, fats, oil, greases program, on-site septic systems, and other stormwater programs, including this position as well as 2 other positions in Public Works Engineering handle the monitoring and maintenance of the wetland mitigation sites that our capital projects are building. So those are ongoing and ever-increasing responsibilities. Excuse me. The other component is that over the years, the regulatory mandates from the NPDES permit have continually to increase. The next phase of the permit that's going to be beginning in 2019 and will be effective through 2024 is going to have ever-increasing responsibilities there as well. And so we'll have to keep track of that and keep our resources at the right level. In short, funding this staffing position allows the city to ensure compliance with the ever-increasing stormwater permit requirements of existing facilities and new facilities that are coming online. And the benefits is that the public actually receives are an increased awareness of surface water projects, best management practices in maintaining the facilities, as well as additional help in answering questions for permitting. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Councilmember Hunt.
Thank you. On the last slide, there's, in the description of the position, it says assist with educational programs, and I wondered if you could elaborate a little bit about if those are existing educational programs that they would help with, and also if there's another position that is supporting that, or if it's outside of the city, or how that works.
Okay, so multiple portions to that question. The additional programs are increasing the quantity and magnitude of existing programs. Under the permit that's been issued, there's increasing requirements for stormwater facilities to be built, whereas before certain size parcels and the like didn't have to deal with those facilities. Now they do have to deal with them. So when they get built, we also have to come in after they've built and continually every year inspect them to make sure that they're being maintained, educate the people that own them of the best management practices and the like. So there's an increased responsibility due to the increasing number of facilities that are out there, as well as expectation that we do more with businesses in their management of hazardous waste on site for best management practices. Those are just a couple of the items that are increasing.
Okay, and just to clarify, those are under the educational programs. That would be, is that considered under educational programs if you're going out to see businesses and teaching them?
Educational and inspection.
Okay. Thank you.
Council Deputy President.
Thank you, Sheldon. So right now, this is a new position, so is it the duties underneath this position now? Are they broken up between different people within the department, or is this all falling to one person?
The department has 2 environmental science staff currently, and the forecasted workload for 2019 shows a need for an additional 2,000 to 3,000 hours of staff time to manage the increasing responsibilities and magnitude of the work program.
Right, thank you.
Any other questions right now? Nope. Yep.
Okay, Scott's going to come up and talk about the 2 positions that are without budget in 2019, but we're looking for authorization to fill at a certain FTE level.
Thank you. We are looking at 2 positions, 2 FTEs, mostly for the maintenance of level of service and planning for vacancies and managing the turnover within the police department. Last year, during the budget process and in the beginning, the first quarter of this year, we talked about how we can manage that gap, or that return of investment from the time of when we know we have a vacancy to the time we can get somebody trained and up and running fully. So what we're focusing on is how we can get to that point, instead of just adding on additional costs and additional services. By adding the 2 FTEs, we'll go to the next slide. The intent of this is to be able to help us kind of maintain that or reduce that gap in level of service. So if we have anticipated vacancies through retirements or somebody leaving the organization, we have the ability to hire somebody ahead of time, get them on board a few months earlier, and be able to get them up and running and have that, maintain that level of service. In the next 2 to 3 years, we have approximately 12% of our departments eligible for retirement, and that could have a pretty significant impact if they start retiring all around the same time frame. So by us adding these 2 FTEs, it would allow us to prepare for that. prepare for that and kind of pre-plan for some of those. And also, we are averaging about 5 hiring processes a year these last 4 years. So as you can see, we're in this constant state of transition within the department. That's the basic. If we don't provide these, then we still have that same issue that we've been talking about for the last budget process then earlier in this year of kind of that, how do we close that gap from when we have vacancy to getting somebody up and fully running. So again, just a reminder, hiring process takes about 3 months from the time we do an initial testing process to a background. Then we're still waiting about a 3 to 4 month gap for waiting just to get into the police academy if they're an entry-level police officer. They're in the academy for about 5 months, then they come back and return and they get another 3 months of training on the street. So over a year until we can get somebody up and running.
First, Councilmember Ramos.
Yeah, just to follow up, like I say, last year we moved those 2 positions forward, funded them so you could start with that process.
Correct.
Yeah, and so now with these being unfunded, like I say, there's a year of cost involved in funding that person. But I guess to clarify here, these would allow you FTEs to maneuver around within your own budget without adding particularly additional costs. Like I say, when you have someone knowing they're going out, more so than the whole year of training for a new officer, to be able to plan that person coming in as the other one goes out. Is that more what I'm hearing here?
Correct. We're allowed to then, we're able to actually, you're authorizing us to be able to carry more FTEs within our budget. And then the cost for salaries, benefits, things like that would be covered through the overall city budget and through the police department budget as well, if we have vacancies within other parts of our department.
Right, so there might be a slight crossover, but generally they'll be filling in behind, and that's why you don't need funding for them.
Correct.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ray.
I'm going to kind of go down the same path, but in a different way. So the way I understand it, this really provides a smoothing function for you so that you can respond to ups and downs. It really doesn't intended to provide an enhanced level of service going forward.
Correct. I'm going to break it out into 2 conversations. One of the conversations we've been talking about and vividly recall the kind of the chasing a moving target. I'll frame it differently but chasing a moving target with the calls for service of an increase, or how do you address that, the smoothing, as you said, of how do you get the uptake of replacing the vacancies faster? So we're focusing on that by adding these 2 FTEs. That kind of helps us with that, shortening that distance of vacancies.
Thank you.
Other questions? And did we see in your planning, the state legislature was creating more classes at the academy? Are we seeing a shortening of the lead time that we think on hiring?
That's why I went for 3 to 4 months, and also there is a conversation at the state level to try and encourage the legislature to change the law regarding how long it is required to have an officer in the academy from 6 months down to 3 months. So there's a conversation possibly coming down to help shorten that, which then would then force the increase of the funding for the increased classes.
Okay, well, that makes me nervous. I like well-trained officers.
Yes.
But
No, it will. No, the 3 to 6 months, I'm sorry, is the mandatory time frame for an officer to attend the training academy, meaning as of now, we can wait up to 6 months before we send them to the academy.
I see.
Not
Gotcha.
the hours. The hours are not being shortened. Sorry for clarification.
It's the whole time ahead of. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you for clarifying that. Other questions? Nope.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
Okay, now I'm going to briefly cover the limited term positions that are in the preliminary budget. We are proposing to overfill permit tech position in DSD to make a transition in a retirement for 3 months. Talked about the special projects manager in the executive department extending for 3 months into 2019. We have an existing sustainability coordinator that is an LTE. We're going to continue that position through 2019. Senior center manager, Jeff spoke about, that's in the interim operations plan. Continuing with that, unless you choose to move toward the long-term model. And then we have a building inspector in DSD that will remain LTE. You know, we talked about one converting to FTE. We also have a building inspector that is paid for by private developer to ensure we can meet their schedule. And so we're going to continue that until that project is built out. Then the last piece that I wanted to mention is we spoke briefly tonight about the utility billing, or UB, implementation. Right now in the preliminary budget, we have some funds for temporary staffing for that project. We've had more time to consider how to best pursue that project, and I'm going to recommend that as we move to deliberations, we consider it's actually less money to do this new option than what we have in the proposed budget right now, is to take 2 part-time positions that we have now, make them full-time for 2019 until the project is implemented, allow those 2 individuals to be the backup in utility billing, and allow our utility billing staff to devote more time to the module implementation. So it's backfilling those positions, but using our existing staff that already have quite a bit of knowledge about our systems, our city. We think that will be a more effective way to both support the UB implementation, but also support the utility billing office continuing to do its work in 2019. That increment of new staffing, going from part-time to full-time, would be indexed to that project. So once the project was completed, those 2 employees would return to their part-time staffing level. So that is part of what I will propose in deliberations, would result in a perhaps slight decrease in what was budgeted.
So Deputy President Batiste?
Thank you, Emily. The sustainability coordinator, that was a full-time position originally, and is now being filled and continuing as a LTE?
Yeah, that's what I thought. I misspoke earlier. It's a part-time position, so it's part-time, limited term equivalent position, and we're going to continue at that same staffing level, 0.5 staffing level through 2019.
And that's where we were before?
Correct.
Got it.
Correct. So it's no change. We just wanted to clarify which limited term employees we're going to continue to have next year.
Other questions? Nope.
Okay, we're going to turn our attention to work plans. We've provided quite a bit of information on all of these slides. I'm going to have department directors just pick out a few highlights, but if you see other things on the slides that you have questions about, please ask. In putting more information on the slide, we at least have it out there as a record and something we can turn back to if need be in the future. So first is legislative department. That's the city council department. And we said that your work plan items were continuing to work on the strategic plan and funding strategies for major initiatives of the city. Again, I'm going to say this is true of every department. We haven't named all of the day-to-day routine activities. We've just tried to highlight some new or substantial work plan items for the upcoming year. In the executive department, a lot of our work will be focused on strategic plan and annual work plan. Also, we expect to provide some framework for the customer relationship management project and related practices in the program that will go with that. We're also providing some key direction as we get the results from the classification and compensation study. We will be helping to make the recommendations on how to proceed. So those are the main activities in exec. Tina, there she is.
Hi, Tina Ager, City Clerk. We do a variety of work out of the clerk's office. 3 items that we chose to highlight as a different or unique work plan for next year would be continuing with our automation of our agenda process. Our vendor is looking at continual upgrades, and so we're sort of at a crossroads with where are we headed with the product, so we certainly want to be involved in that process. We also have our council rules of procedure that we would like to participate in and further develop, and then we have public records process and fee structure that needs some attention. So those would be the items that we would be more focused on next year.
Questions? Nope, looks good,
Thank
thanks.
Okay, on communications, I'll just point out 3 here.
Councilmember Hunt,
Oh, sorry.
It's on the last one, but
Okay.
could you explain, provide outcome expectations for customer relationship management? What does that mean?
Yeah, that goes more to best practices and program structure for that system. So let me give you an example. We may not have a communicated expectation across all departments about how quickly to respond to requests for service of different kinds. And so I expect that my department will be engaged in laying out what those expectations are and how they get built into the system. And the quality of those responses too. There's different tools, there's different ways that you can respond, checking the box or writing a paragraph, for example, and so we may provide some guidelines for that. Okay, on communications, 3 I'll point out. We already talked about the redesign of the city's website, but communications will be very much engaged on that. We're up for our next iteration of the National Citizen Survey next year. So we plan to collect our trend data and also use that as a way to pose significant questions that council members might like to pose. And then lastly, yay, replace and upgrade the council chamber's presentation system. We've all had fun trying to read things on that screen.
Councilmember Winterstein.
Will the new system render colors correctly?
I sure hope so. That would be lovely, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
Yes.
every time Keith says
It's on the
brown, but
list.
it's really green, I get
It's on the
lost.
list. All right. On finance, we touched on this a little bit today. Top bullet is about Questica's open book portion of the application. This is the user interface that could be utilized by council or by the public to kind of look into our finances and run some interactive scenarios. So we're looking forward to building that out next year. We have quite a bit of work to do, I've spoken about in terms of making improvements for internal cost controls or analyzing our budget and fund structure so that we can make some improvements there to be more responsive to ongoing cost needs and have better fund performance. On support services, they are the group that's on the front line, and so they will be heavily involved with the customer relationship management system, helping to design it and the program around it. And then I'm going to call Lori up, talk about HR.
So Human Resources is going to be really focusing on trying to finish the class and comp study that we're working on this year. We'll also be reviewing and updating, rewriting a lot of our policies and doing a comprehensive look at the policies and updating those. We're going to be implementing some of the plan changes that we've made to the benefits system this year, and then also we have successor agreements that we need to negotiate next year in several of the bargaining units.
Questions? Nope.
Okay.
Keith?
Good evening, City Council. Keith Niven, Director of Development Services. So on our work plan for next year is first off to update the Old Town land use codes. So as part of finishing the Old Town plan update, a lot of the action items call for code amendments, including things such as lowering some building heights and adding some architectural guidelines for residential. The second item is continue emphasis on increasing permit efficiency. So part of development services has a external customer focus with permit applicants. Currently, permit processing is lagging, and we're implementing some changes to try and improve our current processing times. To continue working with state parks, they just awarded the contract to Bob Droll to do the EIS for Lake Sammamish State Park, and we see partnering with our partners at state parks to work on the EIS as a big component for next year. Impact and mitigation fee updates. We're currently working on transportation, fire, parks, impact fee updates, and those we see transportation and fire in the first quarter of next year, and then parks will be hopefully by the third quarter of next year. Issaquah treasures, this came up when we were doing the Central Issaquah visions. The treasures have been in the comp plan and have not been updated since the 90s. So part of this will be to kind of go through a community outreach and public conversation about the treasures. Comp plan docket is an annual thing. We will do that again next year. The IMC Chapter 18, Chapter 18 hasn't been updated for 20 years. There are a number of inconsistencies in the land use code. There's lots of references to a planning director, which we don't have anymore. The Central Issaquah design and development standards have not even been incorporated into 18. So 18 needs some work. And this will be a heavy staff lift, as well as some consultant monies we've asked for to have somebody kind of proof it for consistency. One of the commitments made with the adoption of the replacement regulations for Issaquah Highlands and Talus was to go back out and talk to those two neighborhoods about the remaining undeveloped properties to see what the community felt like should be the right land uses. And so we have that listed on our work plan for next year. Sign code update. This is has been on our we're hoping to get this done this year. That did not happen. We had staff leave that were primary staff on that project, and so we're hoping we will get it done next year. It's to make the city consistent with Reed v. Gilbert. Issaquah Municipal Code, Chapter 1205, which is sidewalk use. Part of this was to expand that section to Old Town. We've talked about that as part of the Old Town Plan update. And then Ecology has mandated an update on the Shoreline Master Plan. So that's also on our work plan for next year.
Questions?
Okay. Keith Niven, Director of Economic Development. The first item is, as you know, the legislature appropriated $50,000 for us to host a sports medicine conference. We're currently working on the logistics of that. We have a committee organized around that, and we're starting to talk about venue and timing for that activity. We host a job fair every year. Third is organize and host an outdoor rec business forum. The two niche businesses that we're focusing our efforts on is sports medicine and outdoor recreation. We think that those are two venues that Issaquah can compete pretty seriously on in terms of Puget Sound. We're going to continue to work on the transit-oriented development project. We need to get still development agreements through and then get a project permitted. Next year, AVP is expected to be even significantly bigger than this last year and previous years. This is intended to be the last stop before the beach volleyball athletes head to Tokyo for the Olympics. So this would be a pretty significant event for the city to host next summer. And again, we have Lake Sammamish State Park, EIS, on ED's docket as well, since part of that effort is to look at kind of third parties that could potentially use the park as well.
Question, Councilmember Winterstein.
Real quick, since you mentioned it, did AVP choose to make this an Olympic qualifier?
I don't know the answer to that. I can check on that and get back.
Other questions? Nope.
Thank you
very much.
Jeff's coming up for the next couple.
All right, within facilities, 2 work plan items that have been highlighted earlier, but emphasized here again, related to our City Hall space planning work. The first one being really our continued work with you that we initiated in a work session and beginning to look at a long-term municipal facilities plan and costing model and exploring options with you. At that same time, looking at City Hall Northwest, completing some of that first phase of near-term improvements, allowing us to occupy that space as effectively and efficiently as we can in the near term. And, oh, I went one too many. Parks and Recreation, yeah, highlighting, this really represents 8 of the many work plan items that are identified. I think they really represent certainly the diverse services that we're responsible for. As mentioned earlier tonight, doing some work with trail wayfinding and park sign design. The intent of this is to get a design that would allow us to implement that over time as either park projects are done, new trails come online, et cetera. But to at least have that design completed, continue our work with strategic acquisitions, as well as was mentioned tonight, getting an urban forest management plan completed, as well as a tree cover update. You recall that was a key element as we were adopting the park strategic plan. Item 1 and 3 on this also represent professional services needs that we have that were mentioned earlier. Transition to the senior center, whatever that long-term operating model is, pending our conversation through budget. 2 construction-related items we'll have in park planning. One is completion of an off-leash dog park that we're in the midst of public engagement on right now, as well construction of a bike skills park that we have a conceptual design out as we're going through public engagement. We're partnering with Evergreen Mountain Bike Alliance on that project. Anticipate construction next year. The 2 last items really related to more of our recreation services side as we are set to open the doors to the community center again with the new flooring and then the new adaptations in the facility really allows our staff to look at some new enhancements and some program adjustments. So it'll be an exciting implementation year next year. And then as we're about to launch our new recreation software here, in November and through the winter months as well, what implementation looks like and how what service improvements we're able to provide to our customers. Big work plan item.
Councilmember Winterstein.
Jeff, I'm keying on the word wayfinding. You know that LTAC and it has a vision for that, but do you see this as this design and implementation as distinct and separate from the wayfinding we've talked about?
No, what we've talked about interdepartmental is this would be a collaborative interdepartmental effort.
I like that answer. Thank you.
Councilmember Ramos.
Yes, just jumping back to the urban forest management plan. So that was starting to be discussed a little bit. So we had seen that right on the list. So are we looking at really taking a good, strong look at all our open spaces, our forests that we have, and looking at long-term, management for the next couple hundred years or so. So what we would need to do and take care of that.
Yep. So again, if you recall in the Park Strategic Plan discussion, in fact, one of the actions that came out of the adoption of that was, it was a priority. Now it was, hey, let's make that a 2019 work plan item. So yeah, we look forward to that effort.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Hunt.
I think to manage expectations on the construction ones, it sounds like the construction would be expected not in 2019, or would you, are
Yes.
you?
2019.
Oh, okay, so construction of both, the two parks is expected for 2019, as well as the wrap-up of all of the community engagement and the design.
Yeah. So, yep.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Nope. Thank you.
Thanks.
The police department has, besides the calls for service and the basic community services, there's 3 projects that we're focusing on in 2019. One is the enhanced utilization of our jail within the other jurisdictions within King County. We've been working with some of the other jurisdictions to make sure that we are providing the proper services and the amount of space needed. On the flip side, I'm going to switch to number 3 on this one, is on the flip side, we want to continue to work closely with our court system, but also with a lot of human services organizations to make sure that we have the proper services for those who are either exiting or entering into the criminal justice system, or exiting from our correctional facility, or providing the services that they need while in custody as well. And then another major project, of course, that's more Puget Sound wide, is our Puget Sound Emergency Radio Network project for the replacement and implementation of our radio network equipment. We have been in the process of having 4 radio positions within our communication center, and we are getting those all replaced hopefully here in 2019. As part of the PCERN upgrade project. So that's going to be it's a major upgrade, but again, that's a Puget Sound region. So it's starting with the equipment, and then they're going to start rolling out the rest of the system.
Questions? And PCERN countywide is $500 million, something like that?
It is pretty significant, yes.
I'm clearly in the wrong industry.
Yeah. No. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
All right, Brett Heath, Public Works Operations. Just a couple items. Most of what we do goes unseen and unnoticed, which is generally a good thing. In this case, again, we're doing the pavement overlay program, also known as the pavement management program. We hope to have a discussion with council regarding funding for that program in early 2019. We'll be purchasing the filtration system for well number 4. The lease on that system is up, and that's still in operation, so that's a purchase we'll be making. And then we have a leak in the liner up at Falls Pond, so we'll be working on that and doing some fence installation as well. Questions?
And Falls Pond, that's the one that's by the, what we thought perhaps might for a while be an elementary school location at the front edge of the Highlands, right?
Yes, on Falls,
Pond is just,
it's right off Falls Drive there. You're talking about Reed Pond? Oh, yeah, no, that's Reed Pond, correct. Falls Pond is up behind, almost to the elementary school. It's on Falls Drive, on the way to College Drive. So it's a large pond up there.
all right. Questions? Councilmember Weinerstadt?
Is your second bullet, is that going to be a capital conversation we have? I mean, I take it there's no policy question there because we've already bought it, but it is a capital question.
I believe right now the expense on the lease is in the operating budget.
Correct.
I don't believe that we had this listed on the capital improvement plan. It was part of the policy discussion about which term we chose when we got into this arrangement, that after a certain number of years, we went into it lease to own, knowing we would probably have to operate it until future treatment plant, for example, was determined. And so we're just at the end of that, and through our purchase will convert to our asset at that point in time. We can provide some additional information about that.
Yeah, but like we heard, I think it was during, well, Brad, your first point was, you even said like the dollars for capital overlay, you say we'll have that next year. That was some of that splitting of that capital budget, some of those items that can cleanly be separated from an operational budget. That's what I took that as, so I wondered where this one fell in.
And maybe we're splitting hairs a little bit. In Public Works Ops, we have combined operating and capital budget, and so I think this just indicates not only is it on the work plan to do this purchase, but the budget is just within the fund. It's one single point. But I don't believe it shows up on the capital improvement program. I think it shows up still on the operating side. We can provide some backup information to refresh all of our memories on the year by year and then the kind of conversion cost.
And Brett, because it's up there, I just want to ask you about the granular activated carbon, that filter system on 4. Last time I got an update on that, it was working fine, and maybe we weren't having to replace our carbon as frequently as we thought maybe.
That's correct, yes.
Give me an update on that.
Sure. Briefly, we've done one carbon change, and the current carbon is, we're into it over, let's see, we're going on roughly a year and a half, maybe 14, 16 months, something like that. I'd have to check to get the exact dates. But, and we're continuing to operate, and we haven't seen breakthrough in the bottom of that carbon vessel yet, so that's good news. We may get 2 years out of it. We're continuing to monitor it. We are having some other, issues. The longer we use the carbon, the more iron and things like that start building up in it. But it is working well. And we're also working with a supplier on a pilot program on a small test scale for some other media as well. So. It won't replace what we're doing currently, but it's just a different type of media.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Nope. Thank you.
Thank you. Public Works Engineering Department Work Program for 2019. I'm going to highlight some of the major things that we're doing, and if you have any questions, please ask. First and foremost, Transportation Mobility Master Plan. That was actually budgeted for this year. It was talked about earlier tonight as a reauthorization amount. We plan on getting that going, getting the Transportation Advisory Board up in the first quarter next year, and moving forward with that as quickly as we can. We're also going to continue on the design work for both Newport Way projects, the one between 54th and 900, as well as the one between Maple and Sunset. Those are 2 large corridor projects that we've been working on for the past year or so. 2 other projects working with WashDOT. They're actually WashDOT projects. One of them is to final the interchange justification report that the council just was briefed on at the committee of the whole meeting. I believe it was last week. And then the actual construction of the I-90 auxiliary lane project, which actually will help us in dealing with the Sammamish Road pinch point, bringing me to the next item. Once we receive the final design drawings from WashDOT, we'll begin the design work for the pinch point so that hopefully we can follow in short order following construction of WashDOT's project. One other item is continuation of developing a vision concept for Gilman Boulevard. Early next year, the council will receive a presentation on where we are with the Gilman Boulevard and try and ask for guidance from the council on the project. The department will continue to work with neighborhoods on traffic calming and finalize updates on the traffic calming program, as well as the pedestrian crossing guidelines that need updating. in conjunction with the Public Works Operations pavement management work that's going to occur in 19, we're going to be designing and constructing the ADA ramp improvements in the area of that project in support of the project. The council will see the adoption of the water system plan in first quarter next year in 19. The council has currently had a number of policy presentations and discussions at their work sessions, and there will be a couple of more council discussions to iron out the policies and then bring the water system plan back for adoption. Large water project that we have on our capital program is we call it the SPAR, South Plateau Access Road Pump Station and Transmission Main. It's to construct a new pump station and a transmission main for potable water to go from the valley floor up Issaquah Highlands Drive and tie into the Issaquah Highlands system up there to create a redundant and resilient system. Currently, we're working with WashDOT to purchase their property to be able to place the facilities on it. And then last but not least, completing the work that we need to do to continue to remain compliant on the NPDES permit that Ecology issues us. If there are any questions, I can answer them.
Councilmember Winterstein?
Yeah, could you go back one slide, please? The second to last bullet mentions the pinch point, and I know that for 2018, we put $1 million, I think, in the capital, and I don't believe we had to expend any of that. WashDOT completed their work without requiring our assistance, or do I have that right?
WashDOT's work is solely for their I-90 auxiliary lane. This money was, is my understanding, one, it was supposed to be a revenue bond or some other debt financing by the city, and it was in preparation essentially for us to get the design work done and then go into construction. But our design work couldn't start until WashDOT's finished their design work, which they won't finish until first quarter, second quarter next year. So the million, nothing was spent on the $1 million.
Correct, nothing was spent. We had reason to believe that we weren't going to be able to get that scope of work done in 18 because we had to wait for WashDOT. I will mention that it was also unfortunate in that we reserved debt service payment in 2018 for that project because there was hope that the city would, there was desire for the city to contribute and complete that project. So we had reserved some of our budget for debt finance and that the debt wasn't issued. So going forward, as we talk about debt finance projects, large capital expenditures, one of the things that we're going to try to do a better job of is to communicate impact to the operating budget for those decisions and to thoughtfully budget debt service. For example, typically the debt service payment doesn't happen until, say, the following year. So we're going to get better at anticipating when the impact is to the operating budget.
Other questions for Sheldon? Nope. All right, thank you.
Good evening, council members. David Fujimoto, Sustainability Director. So just a few items we have kind of a pretty wide range of different activities going on in our department. So this, in a way, represents some of that range, certainly not all of it. At the top of the list, you're all familiar with the citywide strategic plan. We're anticipating that that work is going to continue into the very first part of the second quarter with plan adoption. So that we have some continuing planning work that'll be underway. But then following that, and as a part of that, we'll also be talking about the implementation framework. So that's really the important part of that plan, is to take a look at how do we actually put it into use and not let it sit on the shelf, but figure out the best ways for us to incorporate those into our plans and processes. The second item on the Healthy Community Strategy is a reauthorization of a work plan item that we had originally budgeted for this year, but because we've been down a position with our Human Services and Social Sustainability Coordinator, it didn't really allow us to move forward with that body of work. So that person would be coming on board. We're in that recruitment process right now, but that would help us to advance that body of work forward. That was following on some work on the community needs assessment. This is really the part about developing strategies for implementation to address some of those priority needs. There is also the community fund. We'll be administering another round of the community fund next year. You'll be hearing about that at our next work session meeting on the 7th, as well as some of the other city gives items. Some more is coming forward on that piece. The Opportunity Center you also know about. That's a project that we're working with Economic Development Department for the transit-oriented development site, and working on bringing that partner to that project to fruition. There is quite a bit of activity happening throughout the region on homelessness and regional planning and policy. The city's been working on a couple of different areas, one at regional policy level, but then also with our East Side partners and looking at how we move forward with better outreach, day services, shelter, and then housing for homeless individuals in a variety of different populations. And there's several different tracks of work that are moving forward on that, so we're anticipating some additional work on the part of the city in that area. The item on transportation management action plans, this is a piece that really relates to different actions that would be in place as projects come into the city but then move into occupancy. So we do a lot of work related to addressing some of the impacts associated with development, but the kind of demand management side of it, once they're occupied, is less clear. We do have a CTR, or commute reduction ordinance, that addresses larger employers, but we don't address a whole variety of smaller employers or residential development, for example. That was a piece that was also identified in our Sustainable Building Action Strategy as well. City is going to be continuing its work on equity and cultural competency. That's a body of work we had started in the last year and we'll be continuing with that next year. Our main body of work really is for the most part, internally focused. I think through most of the next year, doing some additional planning and assessment, working on policy and philosophy and approach. There's some separate training that's identified in, I believe, in the human resources budget. But then as we kind of do the work internally, it'll start to have a little bit more of an outward-facing component towards the end of the year. With the city, we're also in the process of identifying options and current practices related to developing sustainable building standards. That's a piece that we'll be able to start to take a look at some different options in the first part of next year as we kind of collect some data this last part of this year and start looking towards the next year. There is also a body of work that is related to pollution prevention on the water quality side of the equation. City's been doing some work looking at its internal operations and our practices there, but really the goal is to work in our community and to see what we can do in that forum as well. So we're planning a pesticide roundup and to get some of those toxins out of people's homes and reduce water quality impacts. And then you recently received an update on Squawk-Tallis Community Connections program, and we'll be continuing to work with King County Metro on future implementation, which is anticipated towards the end of next year.
Questions? Councilmember
One
Ray.
before I let David go. Can you talk more about the Transportation Management Action Plan? Fascinating.
Oh, sure. So we currently have a rather old ordinance on the books that doesn't have a whole lot of clarity to it. I think what we found is it hasn't been applied consistently and it needs some clarification. And basically what it does is put in place a plan of action, if you will, for development. So when it moves from it carries forward to occupancy, it basically would carry with the project. So they would need to develop a whole host of kind of different measures to reduce trips. And so it's more active than, and it's more programmatic, I should say, rather than kind of capital oriented.
Other questions for David? All right, thank you.
Okay, our next department was IT, but I think John has touched on most of these, so I'll just ask, are there any additional questions for John on the IT work plan at this time?
No, I don't think so.
Great, thank you. All right, next we're going to talk about capital projects and debt, although maybe not a ton tonight since it's getting close to our 3-hour mark. We can carry over some of the conversation. I had kind of anticipated that on your agenda, but I want to touch on a few things before we wrap up tonight.
Okay.
So first, just want to convey that from a E&I standpoint, principal and interest standpoint, the 2018 budget to the 2019 is relatively flat. And then I want to set the stage for some conversations about capital projects in 2019. The department directors, through their work plan summaries, have highlighted some of the capital projects that are planned in 2019. We have gone through, this is what we call the off year in 2018 on our 2-year capital improvement plan development. Next year, in 2019, we will be doing that thorough update where we come back to you and you work on helping to prioritize projects. And we revise scopes, cost estimates, integrate with new plans that have been done in the interim. But for this year, we still had some true-ups, and we had anticipated doing that in the off year, the second year of the biennial plan. So those true-ups this year have included taking the recommendation from the Parks strategic plan and making sure that those high priority near-term projects get woven into the budget for 2019. You'll recall that in the CIP, 2019 is year 2 of the adopted CIP, and we had some kind of placeholder projects for parks in particular as we awaited the completion of that plan. The other thing that we have done is in the interim, we adopted a new TIP, Transportation Improvement Program or Plan, and so we've incorporated some of that information as well into the 2019 capital projects list. And then lastly, we've done some work to spot check cost estimates and scopes and have trued up to that. And we've received grants and not received grants, and so we've incorporated that information as well. So as we present to you the 2019 preliminary budget, we have incorporated the plan as we see it for 2019 on the capital side of the house. We are therefore in a position right now, should you bless this budget, adopt it in December, to move forward with the projects that are fully funded in the CIP and represented in the 2019 budget. There are some projects that were previously shown or are shown now as being partially or fully unfunded, and we're going to lay those out for you so you know which projects fall in that camp. But at this point, Council has an option. You can say yes to the projects that we have put into the 2019 budget that are fully funded and say those are still the priorities, go forward and get that work done, and we will begin that right away. You also have the option to kind of rehash, go back over everything again, which would be more like what we would do on an on-year, and reprioritize projects, for example. That is not my recommendation. We start getting away from 2-year budgeting at that point. And you have this piece about deciding what to do with the unfunded projects. So you could decide through your budget deliberations that you want to run that to ground and figure out how you're going to fill those funding gaps, or you could continue that conversation for as long as it takes to arrive at the point in time where you've decided which revenue streams you want to attach to those unfunded projects. So I'm going to share with you the list of unfunded projects, the magnitude of those, so that you have an opportunity to see those. I'm not going to walk through tonight all of the projects that are in the 2019 budget, but we can come back to that. But I thought at least we would highlight the projects that are unfunded at this point in time. Some of those unfunded projects are quite sizable, and that's why I think the council deliberation is going to be a little more challenging. In order to fund those projects, you would either need to take a sizable chunk of the fund balance, or you may need to install a new revenue source. Some of those new revenue sources we've talked about require voter consent. So I think those are longer discussions, and that's why at this point in time, administration is recommending a set of projects that have been fully funded in the 19 budget, and that you continue on your conversation, even perhaps beyond 2019 budget deliberations, to decide how to proceed on the unfunded projects. So with that, I'm going to skip, don't watch, don't have any health issues here. I'm going to skip a few slides quickly, and we're going to go to the unfunded projects. So this is it in a nutshell, and you can see most of the unfunded projects are indeed in the transportation bucket. And here are the projects that are unfunded in the 2019 budget. Most of these projects were unfunded in the adopted capital improvement plan, and so they shouldn't be aha moments here. But what I can tell you is even on 43rd Street traffic signal, that project estimate was the project estimate at the time the CIP was adopted. We have done the design work that you authorized in 2018, and the new project estimate is just north of $8 million. So the amount of unfunded is even larger. That's the total cost of the project. It's unfunded, the construction phase. That's our Newport, the segment between SR 900 and Southeast 54th still has an unfunded amount. That unfunded amount has grown since the point in time the CIP was adopted. In part, that's because we notified council of this. We sought a grant. We only received part of the grant, so therefore unfunded went up. The other one that I guess a couple more to point out, Northwest Sammamish Road we talked about a little bit tonight. Bumping that into 19 since we weren't ready to do the work in 18 because we don't have the designs yet from WashDOT. So that project would continue into 19. It was shown in 18 as to be a debt financed position when we were ready to go on it. So we'll need to talk about whether or not we want to pursue that project in 2019, and if so, then do we want to do it through debt? And therefore, again, I think our debt service on that would actually be a 2020 hit to the operating budget. And then the Front Street streetscape, that's a project that was on the 2018 program, but was listed as unfunded. It was moved up in the capital improvement plan during final CIP deliberations, and because of that timing, did not have an attached funding source. So it actually shows up on the infamous page 18 of the capital improvement plan as being unfunded. And unfortunately, on the project page was also shown as to be debt financed. And I would not recommend that you debt finance a project that small, or for the nature of the work. It's tree replacement, and don't usually debt finance trees, although they are long-term assets. So if you wish to pursue that project in 2019 at the point in time we are in this year, then I'd say it's a 2019 project, and we need to, again, attach a funding source. So that's just a few highlights on the unfunded list.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there,
Indeed,
and we're not going to unpack it this evening.
correct.
What I would request is that you summarize the options available in front of us in regards to capital projects in an email
Be happy to.
and request feedback from us. And then you and I and Mariah and the mayor can talk about that feedback. And
Certainly.
And how best to honor that.
Be
I
happy
think,
to.
Unless anybody has violently opposed to that, that's what we'll do. What my intention at this point, so you don't have any other formal material to present tonight?
The only other thing that I wanted to mention really quick before I forget is one project in particular, it's really big font, is a water treatment plant. Just for clarity's sake, since we're already in the midst of kind of talking about this project, just reiterate kind of what the game plan was, and that's, and be transparent about the fact that the preliminary budget does include, because it was part of the anticipated 2019 capital plan, reserves some funds for the water treatment plant design. However, we have to get this in sequence still. The water system plan is going through council right now. Should you adopt the plan as it has been recommended to you, it includes this path of pursuing a water treatment plant. And so therefore, it would be in sync with what's in the proposed budget. If you elect to do something different with the water system plan, then we would not continue to pursue the water treatment plant in 2019. And then lastly, just to reiterate, that is all separate of deciding the fluoride policy, but that we would need to take that up we would need to have a resolution to that in 2018 because it affects, therefore, the design of the plant.
So is all that to say we're running out of time on this particular one? Because there's,
It's to just be clear that we have included in the budget for the capital plan, even though you haven't decided the policies yet, we have included money to do the design on the water treatment plant.
so you've decoupled, I heard you say we had to do something in 2018.
In 2019, you have to decide on the fluoride
In
policy.
2019.
And in 2018, you have to decide on the water system plan, whether you're adopting it and all of its recommendations, and the recommendation includes pursuing a water treatment plant.
So putting money in the budget didn't decouple that decision from adopting the budget. So we need to make that decision on or before we adopt the budget?
No, what I'm saying is, if you do adopt the budget, and it includes the water treatment plant design funding, there's two options there. We can either back it out during deliberations if you've already decided on the water system plan. If you have not, then we just simply would not expend that money out of the water fund in 2019. And it would remain, in the fund.
Okay, I'm still a little hazy on what we have to do still in 2018 and how it relates to the timing of adopting the budget.
Okay, so in 2018, we're anticipating you will complete the water system plan adoption.
When you say that, when? Because we're now entering December, we're entering November.
Oh, sorry, Sean's telling me 2019, I've got my timeline wrong. What month is it coming back?
You said Q1.
Q1, vagueness.
Because honestly, in my life, there's the
Yes.
things we have to do before we buy or around when we
Yes.
adopt the budget, and then there's everything else,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So it sounds like this may be in everything else.
It's sort of in everything else. I just wanted to clarify, it's in your numbers right now.
Thank you.
Sure.
Councilmember Winterstein.
The slides that you rapidly went through, however, represent I don't need to go over them, but those are from our capital plan that are in the budget.
Correct.
And, okay, and a lot of them have numbers like PK003. Some of them don't. And if I wanted to find them, go to the capital plan, I think there may be some here that I don't know anything about. They don't have.
Sure, so, and I'm just looking through the list. I think most of those will be in parks, if not all. And the reason for that is because they were projects that came up through the park strategic plan, and they had not yet been assigned a project number yet.
Okay, so, but we can, okay, so for the operational budget that's in front of us, everything that's on those slides are the capital projects that are in this operational budget. And you then summarize the ones that were unfunded.
Correct. Correct. So those slides show two things. Shows a column of what was in the adopted CIP, and then if the right column, the 2019 preliminary budget, is indeed a list of projects shown funded in the 2019 budget.
All right, thank you.
All right. Other questions or comments this evening? Things you want to get on the punch list for future addressing? Councilmember Winters.
Well, I've been asking my questions throughout, so I don't have anything additional.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, so a couple of things. This is the point in the evening where we'll offer if there's any public comment, if any members of the public wish to take 3 minutes. Up at the microphone, I see at least one member of the public, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to go.
David Kapler. I can talk to the council anytime, but there's 4 gentlemen right here I want to get to. And that's the hillside over where we're going to have a new water tank and pump station that's now filled with garbage and syringes and active campsites, and would greatly benefit by a nice plan and trails and get some people on that site and clean it up. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We provided you that forum. Any other members of the public? Not seeing any. I will mention, I forgot to mention earlier this evening, Councilmember Goodman is excused. I'm wondering if, City Administrator Moon, if you will be issuing sort of a, what we call in my universe a punch list, like an issues punch list, and now we're a couple meetings in, and sort of a list of what you've heard as questions from council, and either answers or when we will get answers, and so everybody can make sure that their questions are, that their questions were communicated correctly.
Yes, we will. We're working on answers to the questions from the previous session still. We'll begin working on answers to questions that you have raised here tonight, those items that we said we didn't have information on with us or that required additional information. And our intent is to package up those questions and the answers. We may do, as Council President has suggested, double check with those of you who ask the questions, make sure that we have it captured correctly before we produce the product and give that to you. But we anticipate turning that around and getting it in front of you in advance of the 3rd budget work session, so in advance of November 7th.
Okay, thank you very much. You know, I'll mention one thing that as we heard these work plans, and I don't know if this matters to everybody, but it would be nice to show where there's linkages between that and the draft strategic plan, because I think there's a number of places where there are. And I think that it would be good as we think about this going forward, understanding how those tie back. I guess I don't need it for the next meeting, but it would be nice by the time we get done with the budget process if we had that information sort of, again, not anything, it's not, and I don't think we're going to going in and yay or naying individual work plan items, but I think for the public to understand how these work plans are informed, because I think they are, by the draft strategic plan, I think that would be valuable for the community to understand. Any final closing thoughts, comments? I want to thank all the members of staff who stayed here for over 3 hours this evening. I saw a yawn or two out there, so, but I really appreciate it. As you know, we consider that, you know, this budget is probably the most important thing we do this year, so thank you for all your time. With that, we are adjourned.